It's 9 o'clock, so I will call this meeting to order. And Chairman Hartgrove is not with us today in person. She's asked me to chair this meeting. So I'll ask Casey Griffin to call the roll, please.
Mr. Cobbins.
Here.
Mr. Darnell. Mr. Eby.
Here.
Mr. Hamby.
Here.
Mr. Holt. Dr. House. Mr. Jensen.
Here.
Mr. Mollenauer.
Here.
Mr. Morrow.
Here.
Mr. Wells.
Here.
Madam Chairman Hartgrove. Mr. Chairman, you have 7 voting members present.
Thank you, Ms. Griffin. I then declare that a quorum is present and we're duly convened. Further ask unanimous consent that Lillian Hartgrove, Nick Darnell, and Ryan Holt, who is observing us online, are excused without objection. So ordered. So ordered. Also, as we speak, please be sure to speak inside in the microphone so you can be picked up on stream. And today, before we get started, I'd like to recognize again Garen Hamby, who we recognized yesterday. Garen is our student member, and this is his last meeting. We'll give Garen a chance to talk here, but several of us made some comments yesterday, and as I said before, the student member, we're one of only 4 states in the country that has a student member on their Board of Education. And I think we are the only state in the country that student member is actually a voting member. And that is a perception that every board member really honors, appreciates the value and the perceptions and the contributions that student member brings. And Garen certainly has been a great student member for us, and I'll ask him to say a few words.
Well, to start off, it's been a great pleasure to have the opportunity to serve on this board for the past 2 years. It's only an opportunity that I won't forget for the rest of my life. That's pretty certain there. I hope that the contributions that I have made over the past 2 years will linger on until the next student member is appointed, which whoever that may be is certainly someone that I'm excited to meet down the road. I guess I'll end it off here. I'll miss all of you, and I'll miss serving on this board.
Thank you so much, Garen. And also, this is the first official meeting that Warren Wells is participating in as a new member from the 4th Congressional District. And we welcome Warren, and then Ryan Holt, as I said, is online and observing, and we'll get to see him the next time. With that, I will ask Dr. Sarah Morrison to give us a recap on yesterday's workshop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we had a full day yesterday. We were here at TBR for our workshop, which included presentations from the Department of Education on some important things that have been happening in Tennessee in education. TISA, the state new funding bill that passed, and some of the implications for that, for the board's work, for the department's work to support districts and schools and the rollout of that new funding formula. We also heard from Dr. Coons, also at the Department of Education, about the ESL listening tour that they recently completed, which will help us in our thinking about rules and policy moving forward to support that population of students. We heard from Rachel Maves about some important vacancy data that the department is collecting and what that means for various policies regarding pipeline and preparation. So some really good discussions over the course of the day. We ended with talking a bit about some of our licensure discipline cases. So it was a full day, good discussion. I think everyone's rested and ready to go today, but thank you for the chance to recap yesterday. Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. We now move into our consent items, and is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Darrell Cobbins moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Mollenauer seconds. Is there, I guess this is by voice vote, so all in favor of approving the consent agenda say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Now let's move into our report items. I think the first items that we have are a report of our subcommittees. Let's pull this up here. The board has 4 subcommittees, I think, that will be reporting today. Now, these subcommittees are an opportunity for board members to get a much deeper understanding of some of the actions before we bring them before the board. Mr. Mullenhour is the chair of the CTE subcommittee, and can you give us a report on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'd like to say thank you to Ms. Williams, Sarah Williams from the department. She did a tremendous job presenting a great deal of information to us at that meeting, some of which you saw again yesterday. Also, our own Dr. Amy Owen, who presented, as well as Eric Olmstead from the department, who did an excellent job, and then Dr. Keith Wilson from the Knox County School System. We curated a group of people to come and just inform us of the issues as they saw them, both from a statewide perspective and then also from a local perspective. And I will say that the one thing that struck me from that meeting and the area of further inquiry that I'd like to focus on going forward is to really identify and create more pathways for occupational talent to enter into the classroom. There are currently a number of pathways by which they can, but there may be opportunities to further increase the talent pool that we can expose to our students. So that will be the focus of our next meeting. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mullenhour. And Mr. Morrow is the chair of the literacy subcommittee.
Yeah, we spent our time, one of the things we want to do, I think we are all very well aware of the literacy challenges, how that's come out of COVID, just the challenges we have in front of us. And so one of the things we've wanted to do as a literacy subcommittee was to simply find out who is doing what already in the state and who is doing it well. And there's great work going on around our state in literacy. And so we had Clarksville Montgomery County Schools come and do a presentation on what they've been doing for their early literacy development, how they have redesigned what it is that they're doing, the way that they have seen growth, the work they've been doing with some of the higher education institutions on the Grow Your Own programs, and seen some real positive results. And so we were very, very encouraged by the data and the process and the work that they've been doing in Clarksville Montgomery. It was a lot of fun to get to let them have a time to share some of the wins and some of the challenges that they have. And we also went through and looked at our retention data. So if you all remember, last board meeting, they came and presented a, what's the name of the group that does that? Tara, yes, thank you. Tara came and presented a lot of research on the value of retention or the implications of retention or the problems of retention and what's it look like, retention rates, and is that an effective strategy or not, and looked at the laws that have been passed around retention. And what we found is there are a lot of, we need to be thoughtful before retention. I know that's part of what we've been talking about, and retention is an option, but it needs to be one that is an option and maybe post interventions that districts try. And so how do we see kids who are not meeting or below expectations, and what are the practices that we're putting in place and giving them time to improve, getting them time to catch up, getting them time to show that they are growing closer to expectations, primarily in between the 3rd and the 4th grade years. And then what are the effects of when they have been retained? And I think one of the things we saw is there's still a lot of information to learn. There's more research to gather, but it is not overly necessarily always effective to just retain, and that there is not a lot of effectiveness in retaining and doing the same thing again. So it was great discussion, great information. And then the department came and shared some encouraging signs on reading screener data, where we started. I just want to say it was really fun to see that, we were all very afraid about a year ago on some of the gaps that resulted of the pandemic, and that there are early signs of progress, that we are making gains and making ground, and what schools are doing in the summers, what schools are doing for their own interventions in reading are having a positive effect on our kids in the state. So it's very informational and excited to keep diving into it.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. And I serve on the Education Licensure Prep Subcommittee that is chaired by Chair Lady Hartgrove, and so I'll give her a report. We had Williamson County was there, and they gave an excellent talk on teacher vacancy. They talked about some of the critical areas to teaching positions filling are special ed and coding are two areas that they have difficulties with. They also have had a 23% increase in resignation and a 50% decrease in applications. And for a county like Williamson County, which is an outstanding school system, that tells us something about what we need to work on. And we asked what were the reasons for the resignations and lack applications. And similar to the ones you hear across the state is obviously morale, mental health, perception, mask, all these challenges that the teachers are having right now. So we need to continue to work toward providing the resources and the needs to reduce that number of resignations and to keep that retention. David Chehek also spoke at the meeting, and he said something that was pretty startling to me. He said that within 5 years of the teacher starting, 50% of those teachers are no longer there. They've resigned. So as we continue to work toward filling the teacher pipeline, and we have the Grow Your Own program, which is an outstanding program. I participated, got to attend this past week when the commissioner and Randy Boyd, president of Tennessee, highlighted the Grow Your Own Center there. And Tennessee is actually the first federally recognized apprenticeship in the Grow Your Own program. That is a great program for filling the pipeline. We also need to continue to work to retaining that pipeline. So these are things that we need to work about. So that was sort of a summary of that meeting. And then for the testing and accountability subcommittee meeting, 95% participation last year in TCAP, and the goal was 80%, I think, for hold harmless. And the state had 95% participation. That's outstanding. However, as we went into 2021 through the pandemic, the on-track or mastered dropped from 36 to 31%. That's not a surprise, but actually, in the state of Tennessee, I think that was one of the lower drops. But then we look at that and we look and we see what can we do to retain and get those back up. And yesterday we talked about the goals of setting the 15% goals increase. And so there's several activities that the state is working on this coming year. Obviously, the summer programming that we had, the Reading 360 program, Tennessee All-Core, High Innovative Schools, student support groups, the Grow Your Own, and family resources. These are all focus areas that they talked about at the subcommittee meeting too. Interesting, as we would expect, that of the drop in testing and accountability, those were greater in the economically disadvantaged, the urban, suburban, the ESL, and the students of color. And what was also interesting is that those that were in school had, or the ones that were out of school had a 2 times greater drop. So again, the importance of being in school. So my understanding is that raw data for this year's test is due out today, I think, or something. So we should start seeing that and getting those results and looking to see what's happened in the last year. We look forward to that. Okay, any questions or comments about the subcommittee rings? All right. Next is recognition. This is what it's all about. This is why we do it. And we'll turn that over to Eve Carney.
Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Dr. Eve Carney, Chief of Districts and Schools at the Tennessee Department of Education. It is my pleasure to be here today to get to highlight and celebrate the hard work of schools across our state from that we call our 2021 Blue Ribbon Schools and National ESEA Distinguished Schools. We have 8 schools to recognize today. We're going to start with the Blue Ribbon Schools, and I'm going to tell a little bit of background about that program, talk a little bit about the schools, and then we'll ask the folks that traveled here today to come up and be recognized. The National Blue Ribbon Schools program recognizes public and private elementary, middle, and high schools based on their overall achievement or progress in closing achievement gaps among student groups. Every year, the U.S. Department of Education seeks out and celebrates great schools, schools demonstrating that all students can achieve to high levels. Since 1982, more than 8,500 schools across the country have been presented with this coveted award, which affirms the hard work of students, teachers, families, and communities in creating safe and welcoming schools where students master challenging content. Today, we are excited to have all 6 of our Tennessee Blue Ribbon schools with us today. We are going to start with Clovercroft Elementary from Williamson County. If you all want to come on up. Clovercroft Elementary first opened its doors in 2011 and is part of the Williamson County School District. The school consists of grades kindergarten through 5th and serves approximately 750 students. Clovercroft was named as a National Blue Ribbon School of Excellence in 2015, and they work hard each day to serve students and families and to create a positive school climate that is conducive to learning. Each day, Clovercroft strives to live and learn above the line while encouraging each other to be respectful, positive, and kind. And with us today, Principal Elizabeth Best and Brandy Burnick, 5th grade teacher. Congratulations.
For the pictures, can I ask the board member who represents that county also participate?
We'll get their boxes back in a second. Congratulations. Next, we have Meg's Academic Magnet School in Davidson County. Meg's Academic Magnet School is located in Nashville and serves students in grades 5 through 8. This is the 2nd Blue Ribbon Schools Award they have received, having won the last designation in 2013. Meg's is a school dedicated to teaching the whole child through a rigorous liberal arts curriculum, allowing their capable learners to perform at high standards of academic and social development. The vision for Meg's Academic Magnet School is for all students to become successful, lifelong learners, creative thinkers, and responsible citizens in a global community. With us today, Dr. Scott Underwood, principal, and Ms. Stephanie Clemson, one of the gifted and talented teachers at Meg's. Come on up and congratulations. Next, we have Thrasher Elementary School in Hamilton County. Thrasher Elementary is a neighborhood school located on the historic Signal Mountain in Hamilton County. Approximately 550 students in grades kindergarten through 5 attend Thrasher under the expert care of its faculty and staff. The mission of the school, through high expectations, is to develop children with active and creative minds, compassion for others, and the courage to act on their beliefs. Thrasher's staff believe that education is the teaching and learning of academic and living skills, which will enable individuals to function in a happy, self-enhancing manner as a positive member of society. In addition to being a 2021 Blue Ribbon School, Thrasher has also been named a National School of Excellence and a Tennessee Reward School. Mr. Jeff Paulson, I thought they were here today. Jeff Paulson is the principal, and we will make sure that they receive their award. So please join me in congratulating them. Now we will move to Town Acres Elementary School from Johnson City. Town Acres Elementary School serves just under 400 students in grades K-4 as part of the Johnson City School District. The school has a tradition of academic excellence, having been named a reward school in 2015, 2017, 2018, and 2019, and also received a Level 5 distinction for academic growth in 2015 and 2019. The mission of Town Acres Elementary School is to prepare our students academically, socially, and culturally by utilizing a variety of learning experiences to ensure that they might become successful, productive citizens. Town Acres staff set high expectations for themselves and for students. Teachers work collaboratively to ensure high quality, rigorous instruction takes place in each classroom each day. With us today, Dr. Steve Barnett, Director of Schools, and Principal Dr. Josh Simmons. Come on up and congratulations. Next, we have Liberty Elementary. Liberty, and that is in Franklin Special School District. Liberty Elementary is a Title I school located in historic Franklin, Tennessee. The Liberty community embraces and celebrates the diversity of its population. It has students attending from all socioeconomic backgrounds, with 32% of their enrollment comprised of Hispanic families. The faculty and staff of Liberty are committed to ensuring that all students and families feel welcomed and are equally determined to deliver high-quality, effective instruction to all students. Liberty students are empowered every day through strong relationships with families, research-based instruction and intervention, and a focus on social-emotional health. With us today is Ms. Amy Patton, Principal, and Dr. Davenport, Assistant Principal. Congratulations. And the last of our Blue Ribbon schools today is Sam Houston Elementary from Maryville City. They are not in attendance today, but I wanted to share a little bit about Sam Houston. Sam Houston Elementary is a Title I school located in Maryville and serves students in grades K-3. The success of the Sam Houston School can be summarized using the famous proverb, "It takes a village to raise a child." Every staff member at the school realizes that students can't meet their high academic standards without love and support. The school's comprehensive counseling program has allowed the school to meet the students' social emotional needs so they could do the important work over the past few years in deconstruction of standards and adoption of additional research-based literacy practices. Congratulations to Maryville City Schools. So we now move to the National ESEA Distinguished Schools that are with us today. This used to be, for those of you who have been in this a while, like National Title I Distinguished Schools, and that is now the ESEA Distinguished Schools program. The National Association of ESEA State Program Administrators has selected examples of superior Title I schools from all states for national recognition since 1996. Each year, Tennessee selects 2 schools for recognition, one for exceptional student performance and one for excellence in serving special populations of students. The schools recognized demonstrate a wide array of strengths, including team approaches to teaching and learning, focused professional development opportunities for staff, individualized programs for student success, and strong partnerships between the schools, parents, and community. This year's schools were recognized at the virtual national conference in February of 2021. And today we are excited to have both of our schools with us today, recognized as 2021 National ESEA Distinguished Schools. We're going to start with Woodland Elementary, located in Johnson City. Woodland Elementary is an outstanding Title I Pre-K-4 learning community within Johnson City Schools. Woodland has been recognized as a reward school for multiple years and has achieved high levels of student growth through our previous TVOS distinction. Woodland's teachers are deeply committed to the principles of academic excellence and collaboration, as they work within their content teams to create standards-based and engaging lessons for all students. In addition to the academic success, faculty and staff are deeply committed to building relationships with students and families and providing students with opportunities for leadership and community service. With us today, Director of Schools, Dr. Steve Barnett. He's up here again. Congratulations for that. Dr. Karen Reach and Mr. Reach, the husband of the principal. So come on up. Congratulations. You should. Last, certainly not least, we are celebrating Fifth Consolidated School from Dyer County. Fifth Consolidated is a Title I school serving students in grades pre-K through 5 in Dyer County. Staff at the school strive to create a culture of excellence, growth, and community by placing a focus on cultivating relationships with both students and families. While high-quality, data-driven instruction is the foundation of success for the school, positive relationships with the students are a key component to achieving that success. Everyone at Fifth Consolidated works together using a whole student approach in order to ensure that all student needs are met. With us today, Dr. Cheryl Mathis, Director, and Ms. Luann Perry, Principal. Congratulations. Again, congratulations to all of the schools we honor today. Best part of the day to get to celebrate and lift you all up here. Congratulations and safe travels home.
Yes, congratulations to each one of the honorees. It's not only the best part of the day, it's the best part of the year and the best part of the job that we have serving on the board is to be able to celebrate and honor those schools and teachers and educators that are doing such an outstanding job. Thank you. All right. Ready to move into the items for action. First item, board member policy, Angie Sanders.
Hello, good morning, Chairman, members. My name is Angie Sanders. I'm the General Counsel for the board, presenting to you on first reading revisions to the board members policy 1.200. This policy sets forth additional detail regarding the composition of the board, including the method and election of officers, new member orientation, and conflicts of interest. This policy was last updated in 2018, and revisions are proposed to remove duplicative language regarding appointments and qualifications of members, and to add further detail and clarity to the section on conflicts of interest and disclosure statements. Edits to the conflict of interest section are intended to provide more clarity and direction to board members and staff, and include edits to ensure compliance with state laws regarding prohibited and permitted interests in contracts, clarify situations when a board member is prohibited from voting on an item in which they may have a personal financial interest, clarify the disclosure form that must be filed with staff, and adds a code of conduct for board members. In creating the revisions to this policy, board staff consulted with other similar agencies. We also reviewed conflict of interest policies from other state agencies as well as local boards of education. And with that, Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Ms. Sanders? Mr. Molinar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No question. I just want to say thank you for the work you've done on this. I've spent a bit of time with Angie discussing the language of this policy, and I wanted to read a statement that I thought was apropos this morning. We as a board, we must hold each other to the highest standards of integrity, thoughtful consideration, and judiciousness. The stakes are high. Students and educators deserve to be served by a board and staff that are trustworthy, well-intentioned, and competent. I think we can all agree on that. While I firmly believe that we are rising to that occasion, in the short time that I've been here, just observing you and each of you and interacting with each of you, I think we are rising to that occasion for sure. We must be reminded that detractors may try to spin stories and fabricate tales of misdeeds. And as we consider this particular policy, we need to be mindful that those detractors may exploit ambiguities, and that they may claim that there's smoke when there is no fire. So I think I can say with confidence that our intentions are all the same. Our intentions are to hold ourselves and each other to the highest of standards, but we have to be very careful in how this language is crafted. So with that in mind, I intend to vote for this today, but I also intend to work with staff between now and final reading to make sure that we're bringing as much clarity to expectations as possible and not creating scenarios in which any of us might be accused of a misdeed without basis. So I would encourage each of you also to just open up a line of communication with Angie and her team and take advantage of the next couple of months to consider this policy, talk with them, and help us to make sure that we set the stage for success all around before final reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mullenhour. Do you have any specific language or anything? Or are you going to bring that the next time, or what?
I do not have any specific language today. I just wanted to bring awareness to the topic so that each of us would have a chance to consider it before final reading. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Sanders? If there are no questions, we have a recommendation. Do I have a motion on first reading to accept this recommendation?
Second.
Second or motion?
Motion, I'm sorry. Larry Jensen, motion to go forward.
I'll take a second.
All right, Mr. Jensen moves. Mr. Mullenhour seconds. Any further discussion? No discussion. All in favor, say aye. 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 This is not a voice, this is a voice vote. We don't have to roll call this vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Next item, Todd Madison, educator license. And when you come up, please state your name and your position. That would be helpful too. Thank you.
Good morning, Todd Madison, staff attorney for the board. I'm presenting on first reading revisions to the licensure discipline rule. This item contains revisions to the denial, formal reprimand, suspension, and revocation rule 0520-02-03-.09. Revisions to this rule create a new category of offenses to include misdemeanor convictions where the victim is a minor. Additionally, revisions were made to create a process for the board to take licensure action when educators agree to surrender their license as part of a plea agreement, court order, or settlement in a legal action. Additional changes were made throughout the rule for clarity and consistency. Of note is a change to the automatic revocation portion of the rule. This change clarifies that pleas taken pursuant to judicial diversion are subject to permanent revocation if the offense is not eligible for expungement. Also of note, clarification that due process is provided by the responsible state agency in situations where the educator has defaulted on a student loan or failed to comply with an order for child support or alimony. Lastly, removing the restriction preventing individuals who are denied licensure from volunteering at schools to comply with statute. With that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Madison? No questions. We have a recommendation. Can I have a motion to accept that recommendation?
I'll second.
Mr. Cobbins moves and Mr. Wells seconded. No further discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Oh, did you have a question? Okay. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item is repeal English as a second language program policy. Dr. Amy Owen.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and board members. Amy Owen, Deputy Executive Director for Policy and Research with the State Board. The first item that I have to present today is a cleanup item regarding the English as a Second Language program policy. In 2018, Public Chapter 929 changed the definition of what content could be in a policy as opposed to a rule, and kicked off a process where the State Board worked with the Department of Ed to transition a number of policies into rule. One policy that moved almost entirely, or really entirely, into rule is the English as a Second Language program policy. That rule is now fully promulgated and in effect. Because of that, we're proposing a repeal of the policy so we don't have duplicative information, some in a policy, some in a rule. It can get confusing and it's easy for those things to come out of alignment. So I recommend repeal of this policy on first reading.
Any questions for Dr. Owen? No questions. Can I have a motion to accept the recommendation to repeal?
Hey, Morrow, so moved.
Mr. Morrow moves, a second. Mr. Hamby seconds. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item, statewide dual credit.
Thank
Sociology.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have several items related to statewide dual credit today. The first item is regarding proposed revisions to the standards for statewide dual credit sociology. Dual credit courses are an early post-secondary option where the course standards are designed by higher education faculty members from a number of institutions. The Board of Regents serves to coordinate those efforts. The courses are taught by high school teachers who've had special training, and students in dual credit courses can take a challenge exam at the end to attempt to earn college credit. As I said, the standards are set by higher ed faculty, and in this case regarding the statewide dual credit sociology course, we certainly respect the expertise of the higher ed faculty members on the content of a college-level sociology course. However, this is the board for K-12 education in Tennessee, and one thing that it's important that we make sure to do is to have courses that set up districts and teachers to be in compliance with all relevant state laws. And as we reviewed both the current sociology standards for dual credit and the proposed revisions, we noticed a number of standards that were likely to put districts and teachers out of compliance with recent state laws regarding prohibited concepts in instruction. We shared that feedback with the Board of Regents, who went back to the higher ed faculty, who elected not to make any changes to the standards. And because of that, we do need to recommend denial of approval for this course today. Again, because we need to be approving course standards that set up districts and teachers for continued compliance with all state laws. Should higher education faculty wish to revisit this course and the course standards, we would be happy, of course, to re-review in the future. But at this time, we must recommend that this course is denied for approval.
Are there questions for Dr. Owen?
Question.
Yes, Mr. Moore.
What was the rationale from the higher ed faculty for choosing not to make any of the changes?
I don't want to speak fully on their behalf. I think they felt that it was important content to include in a college level course, which I can certainly respect from their perspective. However, the relevant state law speaks to courses taught by employees of an LEA or public charter school, which dual credit courses are. That's a difference from a dual enrollment course that's taught by a higher education faculty member, which is why it's falling under the purview of this law. Sure.
Mr. Mullenhour.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Owen. A couple of thoughts that I'd like to offer to the board. One is, and Dr. Owen, please correct me if I'm getting any of these facts incorrect. My understanding is that there have been a number of courses, some of which we'll vote on today, that were collaborated on and coordinated with the Board of Regents, and that changes were in fact made to a number of those courses. It sounds like it was a team effort and worked well. In this particular case, as Dr. Owen has indicated, a number of concerns were raised, and somewhat surprisingly to me anyways, the response was no change whatsoever. So I'm not sure if there was a different panel on this particular course or what the issue might have been, but I want to emphasize one thing, and I want to also give deference to the fact that we're here today hosted by the Board of Regents. They've been generous in allowing us to use their space. And we do have every intent of collaborating with them and working with them. I'm speaking somewhat on behalf of the staff here as well, having observed the work that they've been doing. What we need to be reminded of is that the legislature did in fact pass 49-16-1019, which Dr. Owen referenced a moment ago, which prohibits LEAs and public charter schools from including or promoting a variety of corrosive ideologies. While we would want to collaborate with the state board or with the Board of Regents to create these types of dual opportunities for our students, I would just ask that we, I would ask the Board of Regents to give appropriate deference to the legislature. It does not seem that that was done in this particular case. But it's certainly important, and it's certainly invited, and I hope that we can get this course tailored as necessary to get it approved and available to students. So thank you, Dr. Owen.
Thank you.
Other comments? I will also say that I think the state board staff has worked hard on all these courses to assure that, as you were saying, Dr. Owen, not set the districts up for non-compliance. And there is a difference between dual enrollment and dual credit. I did get comments from various superintendents, concerns about removing a course, et cetera, but I think under the circumstances, this is the right action to take at this point in time. So, Mr. Morrow.
And just for my own clarification, based on what Mr. Eby said, so if you're recommending that because if someone in a dual credit course was teaching this, they would be breaking the law that Mr. Mullenhour just referenced.
What our line was, and you'll see this in the next item where we have several other statewide dual credit courses, we wanted to make sure that the language of the standards themselves would not put teachers and districts out of compliance. There are some cases, this law has a carve out for the impartial discussion of controversial aspects of history.
Right.
And if that's included in the standards, that's fine. But in that case, it's more a matter of how is the subject taught, what materials are you using, and so forth. But we were looking at, is the language of the standard in compliance?
Right. And you're saying it is not.
That is, I will look to my counsel, but you know, coming up, the question was that the language of the standards themselves are out of compliance on this.
Yes, it's our assessment that there are some standards in here that did not meet the law.
Okay, thank you.
And just one other statement, particularly for new board members. It is our role to set the standards. We don't set the curriculum, and these are standards that we're talking about. Mr.
Just
Jensen.
curious how this applies to charter schools as well as private schools. If you could give me some insight on that, I'd appreciate it.
The law talks about employees of an LEA or public charter school, so it affects both of those faculty members. It does not talk about courses taught by higher ed faculty or any sort of course of instruction at a private school.
Further questions? We have a recommendation of denial by the state board staff. Do I have a motion to accept that recommendation?
So moved.
Mr. Mullenhour moves to accept the denial recommendation. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Jensen seconds. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Owen. Next item.
Thank you. On item E, we do have courses recommended for approval, a number of statewide dual credit courses, some with revised standards, and then some new courses as well. As I mentioned, in this case, the Board of Regents serves as a convening body. The course standards are considered by higher ed faculty at a number of institutions across the state. There are several courses that are up for approval with revised standards, one of which we just referenced, and I will reemphasize, is statewide dual credit American history. We did find that the standards for this course met the expectations of law because the language of the standards themselves talks about the impartial discussion of potentially controversial aspects of history. However, it is incumbent on districts and teachers to consider ways that those standards are taught and what materials are used to ensure that they maintain compliance. And we would encourage our higher ed colleagues, and I'm looking at Victoria Harpool from THEC, to think about what materials are recommended, what does training look like for teachers with these courses, what content is included on the challenge exam, to help support our districts in maintaining the right side of the law here. The higher education faculty also reviewed and updated standards of 5 other statewide dual credit statewide dual credit courses. There we go, too many S's. SDC Criminal Justice, Introductory Statistics, Introduction to Agriculture Business, Introduction to Psychology, and Speech and Communications. And finally, there were 2 new statewide dual credit courses developed. Those include Principles of Marketing and Introduction to Education, both of which will be embedded into their respective CTE pathways and provide an opportunity for students on CTE pathways to earn early post-secondary credit. So with that, we do recommend these courses for approval.
We have a recommendation. Are there any questions for Dr. Owen? I'll just say that, again, I'd heard from a couple of superintendents, and I'm really glad that the staff and the TBR were able to work together to continue to provide these courses in a compliant manner. I think that's very important. And also glad to see the new course on teaching educator. I think that will help in the filling the pipeline. Any other questions or comments? If none?
I did have one
yeah.
question, just on process for review. So when you're going through and evaluating what we were in the standards and what are now going to be in the standards, what's the process of decision-making to remove or add?
So in this case, dual credit courses, the standards are set by a coordinated body of higher ed faculty from the Board of Regents, locally governed institutions, and the UT system. They present the standards to the state board for approval or denial. We do not have any sort of line item edit authority because it is set by the higher ed faculty. What we can do, and what we did, is we highlighted standards that were potentially problematic in light of recent state laws and sent it back to the faculty to determine on their own whether they wish to make changes. And that's important because in higher ed there's an expectation of academic freedom that's a little bit just different from how we approach things in K-12 where students are still minors.
Any other questions?
So when this was sent back, recommendations from state board staff to Tennessee Board of the collaborative effort
Yes.
said, yes, we agree with those, here we go.
And they were able to have their faculty was the one who finally approved what they wanted those courses to look like for the board to sign off. We were not making edits after they saw the courses.
Great.
And just to add on to that, I mean, that's a very different process than we take for standards in K-12, where we've got
Correct.
educator teams, we've got the standards recommendation committee. This board votes on those final standards, so it's an important distinction to make, I think.
Yes.
Further questions? No questions. We have a recommendation to accept these. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Hamby moves. Do I have a second? Mr. Wells seconds. Any further discussion? None. All in favor of accepting the recommendation signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item. Dr. Lisa Kuhn.
Good morning. I am here to present item F, which is the first reading item for teaching as a profession and foundational literacy course standards. The Tennessee Literacy Success Act, Chapter 3 of the Public Acts of 2021, First Extraordinary Session, requires the department to develop a foundational literacy skills instruction course for high school students participating in the Teaching as a Profession program of study. Per this statute, the Foundational Literacy Practicum is a new course that will be offered as a Level 4 course in that pathway for both the Teaching as a Profession program and the Early Childhood Education Center's program of study within the Education and Training Career Cluster. We are really excited about this course because it helps our aspiring educators in alignment with the EPP Foundational Literacy Standards that you passed last July, our Teaching as a Profession, our Reading Instruction course for our practicing teachers. All are embedded in the same content, the same opportunities, and having coherent language. So this opportunity to add the foundational literacy skills practicum for our aspiring educators still in high school is exciting because it brings all of that content and coherence to the work. TCA requires us to prepare a fiscal analysis of any policy, rule, or regulation proposed to the State Board of Education. This item has no financial impact on an LEA. The department recommends acceptance of this item on first reading. The State Board staff concurs with this recommendation.
Questions for Dr. Coons? I have a couple of questions. Talks about a Perkins 5 concentrator. What is a Perkins 5 concentrator?
I would need to defer to Sarah Williams for that question. This was really exciting because it brought our CTE folks, our literacy folks, and our EPP folks all together. So I'm going to defer to Sarah about Perkins 5 questions.
Good morning, Chairman. A Perkins 5 concentrator is a student who takes 2 courses in sequence in a program of study.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so when they finish this course or series of courses, is there, like in welding, you get a certification, is there anything that the finishing these series provides, or what's the benefit as far as in their future college, do they get credit, or how does that work?
Sure. So the course that was just approved for dual credit, that Introduction to Teaching, will be a level 4 course. That does allow students an opportunity as they're going through either the teaching as a profession or early childhood careers programs of study to get that post-secondary credit. It also sets them up for success should they want to enter into an apprenticeship program related to education. So it gives those foundational skills through the teaching as a profession 1, 2, 3, and then this as kind of a capstone course.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions? We have a recommendation then to approve these courses. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Mullenhour moves. Do I have a second? And Mr. Cobbins seconds. Any further discussion? No discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is
Good morning again, Mr. Chair. Amy Owen with the State Board of Education. I have on item G the approved high school courses policy, which really captures the changes in the last 3 items that you saw. Those actions were to approve or disapprove specific courses, and in the approved high school courses policy, we maintain that documentation of which courses may be taught at the high school level. So we are capturing the relevant changes regarding statewide dual credit courses, the removal, the additions, and then also some courses that have been offered for a number of years, but as an oversight had not been included in this policy. And we are also capturing that exciting new course that Dr. Coons just talked about, Teaching as a Profession, the Foundational Literacy Practicum is added as well. So we recommend this item on first reading to catch up with all of the course approval changes.
any questions for Dr. Owen? No questions. Can I have a motion to accept the policy?
Nate Morrow, so moved.
Mr. Morrow moves. Do I have a
Second.
second? And Mr. Mullenhour seconds. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Owen. Next item. Charter school rule.
Thank you, Chairman, board members. My name is Jack Powers, and I'm the Director of Policy at the State Board of at the Tennessee Department of Education, and I'm here to present to you on first reading revisions to clarify the definition of complete application for the purposes of approval of charter applicants. These changes will apply to applicants seeking to open a charter school in the 2024-2025 school year. Just to provide a little bit of background on this item, approval of a charter school rule outlines the process for a new charter school to apply for approval from an authorizer. The rule provides that an authorizer is not required to review an application that is not complete, and then lists the definition of a complete application. Different information is required to be submitted for different categories of applicants, and those categories of applicants include new start, replication, out of state, or schools existing within the Achievement School District. So this has caused some confusion among authorizers and applicants in interpreting what application category to utilize, and thus if the application is in fact complete when submitted to the prospective authorizer. In addition, authorizers have moved to disqualify applications based on submission guidance, such as errors with page numbers rather than a clear threshold of completeness. And so what this item attempts to do is kind of twofold. It attempts to further define what a complete application is and ensure that structures and processes are in place to where an authorizer cannot just cease to act on an application based on citing it as not being complete or any other errors with the application. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that board members may have.
Any questions for Mr. Powers? I just had one suggestion to fix between first and second reading. And number I, it says the authorizer must determine whether an application is complete within 10 business days of receiving and must notify the applicant sponsor. Consistent, I think that should be shall instead of must. So if we fix that between first and second reading.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Just a quick comment. I appreciate the partnership on this one in particular with Jack and his team at the department, because this is something that's come up over the last year and a half as an issue, and I think we've worked well to try to put some things in place here in this revision that will solve that in terms of making it clear for applicants and charter authorizers, you know, sort of what lane these applicants should be in terms of the application process. So a little bit inside baseball, but I think this is an important change, so thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Mullenhour.
I just wanted to thank Jack for the work on this.
I had a question.
Yes, Mr. Jensen.
Could we get, maybe for the next meeting, sort of a report on charter schools? Just high level, not an in-depth thing, but so that we can sort of see, we gave up oversight, et cetera, but it'd be helpful just to know in some amount of detail what's going on, what it looks like, how many, so on and so on. I would appreciate that.
Yep. I'll get with you, Larry, offline to make sure we kind of capture the elements of that you'd want, like state board responsibility and how that shifted versus sort of what charter schools are in the state.
I understand we're not, but it'd just be helpful to,
Yeah.
to be able to understand that.
You know, something else that might be helpful is just kind of an overview of the differences between charter school, public school, and a private school. I know a charter school is a public school, but just the differences that may be helpful to some members as well as to the public, because there is a lot of confusion out there sometimes. So.
Maybe this is a good chance to bring Tess Stovall back. Have her present to the board again in her new, relatively still new role.
I was thinking that, as a matter of fact.
Good suggestion, Mr. Jensen. Any other questions or comments? We have a recommendation then to accept charter school rule on first reading. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item, academic and instructional requirements.
Thank you, Chairman and board members. Jack Powers with the Department of Education. I'm here to present on first reading an item that revises the promotion and retention requirements for third grade students pursuant to Public Chapter 1 of the 2021 First Extraordinary Session. These changes go into effect beginning in the 2022-2023 school year. And so just to provide a little bit of background on the item, we're bringing revisions to the section of the Academic and Instruction Requirements Rule pursuant to Public Chapter 1 of 2021. This is better known as the Tennessee Learning Loss Remediation and Student Acceleration Act. So this act, in addition to outlining various requirements designed to help our students accelerate learning following the COVID-19 pandemic, also updated the state's third grade retention law. Specifically, Section 2 of that public chapter requires that beginning with the 2022-2023 school year, a student who is in the third grade shall not be promoted to the next grade unless the student is determined to be proficient in ELA based on that student achieving a performance level rating of on track or mastered on their third grade TCAP. The law then authorizes students who score below or approaching on the TCAP to be promoted to the fourth grade if specific conditions are met. The list of conditions includes retesting on TCAP, attending a learning loss bridge camp before the beginning of the upcoming school year, demonstrating adequate growth on the learning loss bridge camp and pre-post test, or being assigned a tutor through the Tennessee All-Corps and receiving tutoring services for the entirety of the fourth grade school year. Public Chapter 1 additionally required the department to develop and administer an appeals process in State Board Rule to be administered by the department for students who are identified for retention based on achieving the approaching category on their third grade TCAP. And so this rule revision includes a first draft of an appeals process to be administered by the department. Again, board members, these revisions must be effective early in the 2022-2023 school year so that promotion and retention requirements are clear for students, parents, and families prior to retention decisions being made in the spring and summer of 2023. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that board members may have.
I think board members have received some comments and questions on this. I'll ask if any others have any comments or questions first. If none, I've got some, here's a couple of questions that I received from an educator. Is third grade TCAP designation of an on-track or mastered from a singular test administration the only clear and proven predictive indicator of future success? Question, that's sort of a rhetorical type question. Are there other pieces of evidence from the third grade instructional year that could be used to dispute the TCAP scores?
So I would say in the context of this law that we're discussing, the answer to that first question is yes. I will say Tennessee is very lucky to have a statewide rigorous assessment system in place where we can use the same metric across the state to identify students who need additional assistance. Is third grade TCAP the only indicator to determine a student's likelihood for success in life? I would say the answer is no, of course, but this rule revision concerns ELA, it concerns reading proficiencies. One thing I think is useful to call out, just to frame additional questions that I'm sure are coming, is that only a third of our students in Tennessee are reading on grade level. And so although there may be additional metrics that we can use as tools in the classroom, as teachers in the classroom, things like universal reading screeners, things like locally derived or locally selected benchmark assessments, the TCAP assessment is the apples to apples statewide metric that we as a state use to identify students who may need additional support. So I do believe it's the appropriate metric in this situation, and so does the department and the administration.
Thank you. And then question, can multiple district level benchmark assessments scored by a third party that indicate on track or mastered during the same school year be used to override a below or approaching designation on TCAP? This would decrease the high stakes nature of a test administered to young students and would address the fact that Tennessee has a less than reliable history of consistency of administering testing.
So the answer to that, I would say, just strictly, could a locally derived benchmark override the identification for attention? The answer to that is no. There were discussions about that during this past legislative session, and what I'll say now is that the law was not changed. It remains that if a student is in that approaching category, third grade ELA is still the only indicator that can be used to say whether they're identified for retention or not. I will call board members' attention to the fact that in the sections of this rule that outline the appeals process, benchmark assessment scores are one of two items that could potentially be used. Data generated from those benchmarks could potentially be used by a parent or guardian to form the basis of an appeals. But again, that would not supplant third grade ELA as the metric that has identified a student for attention.
So I think that's important to note is that from an appeals process, the department would consider other benchmarks on top of TCAP.
Specifically for approaching students, the department would consider other benchmark assessments in addition to results on one of the state board approved universal reading screeners. So it has to be both of those items.
Good. I think that's very important. Thank you. Mr. Morrow.
Just want to clarify again. So, because we talked about this, so this is, we're identifying them coming out of third grade. They're moving on to fourth grade with summer remediation, summer tutoring, and then we're tracking progress through fourth grade. So the intended or potential remediation year would be fourth grade, not third grade. Is that correct?
That is correct. I'd just call out and reiterate what you said about summer programming. That's taking place between third
and fourth grade. And
just to kind of be very clear, because the requirements are slightly different depending on if a student has scored below on TCAP or approaching.
Correct.
If a student has scored below and thus is identified for retention, they must attend summer programming and pair with the TNL core and receive high dosage, low ratio tutoring. If a student is approaching, they can choose to either attend the summer programming, they must make adequate progress on the pre and post test, or they could pair with a TNL core tutor and receive high dosage, low ratio tutoring. The law also has some carve-outs for other specific scenarios, but those are the two main options.
My question is, as the department will be handling the appeals process, I think it would be important, is there a plan for how do we assess the effectiveness of the interventions that are being put in place and the results of those interventions? And is there a resource board for as we go through this, right? As we go through this, like determining what interventions are effective and what are not ineffective. So in your appeals process, are you going to be looking at those things and
So that's
evaluating the
a-
effectiveness of the interventions that are put in place?
Absolutely. So that is a good question. There are a couple things I'll say. I think the answer to that is yes. We definitely have the data systems in place and do plan to examine the implementation of this law. I would say it is less about through the appeals process, right? And more about continuing to look at those students and how they perform in subsequent grades, right? It would certainly be possible in our data systems to look at students who were identified, successfully appealed, and later moved on and examine their performance. Board members got a presentation, I'll note, that has already been referenced by Tara, examining retention based on the law change back in 2011. So again, the data systems exist to do that sort of thing. I will say, in terms of examining the efficacy of the different interventions, I do want to highlight a change here that is good and a difference between the old 2011 law. And that is that there aren't a lot of different intervention options here. We have in the law and as well as in the rule a very clear requirement for what that summer programming has to look like, so that if you go across the state, as we did last summer during our listening tour and we'll do again this summer, summer programming may look a little different from district to district, but the requirements in terms of what subject matter that those students are getting and how the day is broken down, and really for the most part the length, is uniform across the state. And then TNL core and the high dosage low ratio tutoring, that is research based. And similarly, based on the guidance, training, resources provided by the department, those interventions will look very, very similar too. So I do think it's important to mention, one of the biggest differences between that 2011 law and this one is that it shouldn't be so hard to look and see what is effective, because there aren't really a whole lot of different options compared to the 2011 law, where it was kind of a choose your own adventure on the district side. This was the state saying these are the interventions that we believe will work and need to be implemented to help students read on grade level.
Great. And the two things I think just are important too, as I think through this, like we talked about, a heat map, like if there are consistent school districts or schools who are looking to use retention more than what maybe ought to be the averages, or more what we've seen in the research as a strategy, that we can kind of see if those areas are turning red and address those specifically as opposed to broadly. And then I think it must be important, like that we would have information very readily accessible to families about the appeal process. So if there's a conversation in their fourth grade year and we're not seeing the gains, and you're starting to see even by Christmas that we may not be making the progress we need, that there is a level of engagement with the families from the district on here's what this might mean. Because when you look at the social, emotional, all the other effects of retention that can have on a kid, I think it's important for us to make sure that all parents know their rights in this, just like you would at the beginning of an IEP meeting or something like that, they're easily accessible and available for the families.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you calling out the importance of those communication networks, those communication channels. I'll mention that the rule is specific about, I believe in February, that is the first kind of point in time when it's required for school districts to let parents know. This is going to take kind of an all hands on deck approach, right? There is certainly a lot in here that we are asking and that has been asked of our local schools and our local school districts. There's a lot that the state is responsible for doing as well, and that's because, again, hearkening back to the low literacy rates that have persisted for years, this is going to be hard work, but it's work that we believe will be effective. And we are certainly mindful of making sure, to the extent that we're able, that any of the guidance that we produce, assistance we're providing to districts, lets them communicate through the channels that they have to ensure that none of this has a disproportionate impact on one student group over another.
Thank you.
Mr. Mullenhour.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. Excellent job today. I'm going to offer one follow-on comment to, I believe, Mr. Morrow's inquiry. This is a field where there could be a lot of unintended consequences that are specific to individual children and their well-being and their just psychologically the challenges that they might face. It's not just about reading, and I realize that you understand that very well. I can see there's more than trace elements of that interwoven into what has been proposed here. So I know you're taking it into account. sometime between now and final reading, could you provide us with a little bit more insight into how we are seeking the objective of not only helping children to read at grade level and to remediate some of the issues that we've been talking about here, but also safeguarding the hearts and minds and health of the child at the same time, and just help us understand how you're trying to optimize and balance those equations, and that we're not allowing the I would say persistent rhetoric around getting everyone at grade level, which is an admirable objective, but that we're not allowing that to steer us into a realm where individual children might be sacrificed along the way for reasons that have nothing to do with reading. Thank you.
Absolutely, and we'll be sure to follow up and get you more information, sir.
Yeah, and as sort of as a follow-up to that, I think all the board members got an email that expressed a little bit of concern with regard to the retention law that impacts the students with disabilities and disadvantaged students. So this person was recommending that we postpone the vote. Again, this is first reading, and we can look at it between first and second reading. So.
It just underscore again, because I saw that email as well, and I know all of you are hearing from constituents about this, the law and the rule, because it is identifying a lot of our students, like you said, Jack, who are not on grade level. But I think it's important to remember too what the law requires and what we can do, in terms of the rule. So there's just, there's some things that are prescribed in law around that TCAP designation in particular, and so just making sure that we continue to come back to that with constituents to say, here's what the law says, here's what we're able to do in policy to further define that.
Absolutely, and I do want to make sure to just call out something that is explicitly stated in the law that has resulted in the rule changes that we're bringing in front of you today and is included in that draft. The law specifically states that LEAs in public charter schools shall not retain a student based on the student's disability or suspected disability. And I do want to mention as well some guidance that the department has already put out related to this matter in the wake of the passing of this law. So really important to keep in mind that retention and promotion decisions must be made on a case-by-case basis in consultation with the IEP and or 504 team, as well as parents and guardians, to determine if the student's performance or suspected disability or their diagnosed disability is specifically impacting their ability to read. So wanted to highlight those, and additionally just say, of course, we are more than welcome to keep continuing to have conversations about how we can make that even more clear in the rule between first and second reading, and certainly welcome more feedback and conversation.
Appreciate those comments. Those are very good, and yours too, Dr. Morrison. Any other questions or comments? So we have a recommendation on first reading. Is there a motion to accept this recommendation?
So moved.
Mr. Mullenhour moves. Do I have a second? And Mr. Cobbins seconds. Any further discussion? No discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, board members.
Next item is educator evaluation policy. Right. Yep.
Good morning. I'm Martha Moore, Senior Director of Educator Effectiveness with the Department of Education, and I'm here to present on Educator Evaluation Policy 5.201. This first read item presents revisions to the list of approved charter school alternate observation models, which is Appendix A, and approved achievement measures in Appendix B. The two new charter proposals for alternate observation were submitted by Green Dot Charter Schools and Grizzlies Prep. These are the teacher evaluation rubric, and the administrator evaluation rubric is listed in the policy. We also have several achievement measure updates to make through this conversation. Educators and evaluators are responsible for selecting a closely aligned achievement measure from either the pre-K-8 or 9-12 grade band for the purposes of calculating a given percentage of an educator's overall level of effectiveness score. These measures should be aligned as closely as possible to the educator's assignment. The following measures have been reviewed by department experts and are recommended for use as achievement measures in the 2022-23 school year and beyond. These include the CASE assessments, the U.S. history success rate, and the biology success rate in the pre-K-8 grade band. In the 9-12 grade band, we are adding or suggesting we add the CTE concentrator science, CTE students, science, and case assessments. This new item also adds some achievement measures from the industry certifications for career and technical education. These are based on recommendations from content experts in the department's College, Career, and Technical Education Division. These include the following career clusters: advanced manufacturing, agriculture, food and natural resources, architecture and construction, arts and AV, health science, information technology, and marketing. Additionally, we are recommending the removal of certain achievement measures. Upon review of the overall list, we discovered we had a multitude of measures that had not been selected for use by any educator in the state for up to 4 consecutive years. We took that information to several stakeholder groups, including directors of schools, and based on their feedback, there was clear support for streamlining this list. We have a list of measures that are recommended for removal due to lack of selection for 2 or more consecutive years. These include ClassWorks, CLEP, Connected for Learning, Developmental Reading Assessment, Learning.com, Limelight, Linguafolio, the National French, Greek, and Spanish exams, Noella, the Oregon Project, Stamp, Terra Nova, and PSAT. Additionally, we're going to remove some TVOS composites from our list, specifically early grades, grade 3 science, and early grades, grade 3 social studies. These tests were shortened in the 2017-18 school year, and they no longer have a sufficient number of test items to adequately and robustly measure teacher impact. There is no fiscal impact to districts, and we do recommend acceptance of this item on first reading. I'm happy to take any questions you might have about any of this.
Any questions? I did have one comment. It says educators who receive an LOE score for 2020-2021 school year shall receive the maximum number of professional development points available to educators for that 2020-2021 school year. Should that be in this policy now that it's past time? Should that be removed, or?
I think we can confer with our PLA team about removing that language. I would think because it specifically targets that school year that it could stay, but do you guys have any?
Just doesn't seem relevant.
Or it could be removed because it's been taking place. So I think that's something we can address.
Yeah, I'd say between
first and final.
Take a look at that because it's
Okay.
kind of confusing, So.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? We have a recommendation for accepting the policy. Do I have a motion? A motion by Mr. Cobbins, a second? Second by Mr. Hamby. Any other further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Next item is Education Preparation Program. Michael Dearline.
Good morning. Michael Durline, Senior Director of Educator Licensure and Preparation at the department. This item is the Educator Preparation Rule. This section focuses on the approval of specialty area licensure programs. And as a means to ensure all EPPs are in alignment with the Literacy Success Act, this provides a pathway by which we could bring a recommendation to you all for a change in status for a licensure program. Currently, the only mechanism you all have to change the status of a licensure program is during that 7-year comprehensive review cycle. This would allow that cycle to be kind of interrupted if we find that a specialty area program is not in alignment with the literacy standards. I'll also note that in the process of drafting this language, Public Chapter 974 was passed, which essentially does the same thing. We're still very closely looking at that law to determine what, if any, other changes may need to be made to this rule. Happy to take any questions you all may have.
Any questions for Mr. Dearline? I did receive, our Chairman Hartgrove received a letter from the professor and dean at Tennessee Tech that she'd like for me to read. It says, "Hi Lillian, my only thoughts about the info Michael is sharing. There's always a statement at the bottom that says no cost to the LEA. I realize they don't really care about cost to us, but there will be cost to us for item K in particular. A substantive review usually entails us compiling a self-study report and then hosting the reviewers. Sounds easy enough, but it takes time to pull the team together, pull the data together, and another team to write up the report. This means paying people to do the extra work and perhaps even covering conference/travel costs to ensure our folks are prepared for the literacy standards. Minor stuff in the grand scheme of things, but it's one more example of the piling on with nothing being removed from our already busy plates. Same goes for the LEAs. I appreciate you sharing with me and gather our thoughts. Sincerely, Lisa Zegumni, PhD and Professor in Dean, Tennessee Tech. So just want to pass that on.
I appreciate that. It's not the first time we've heard that. I'll also say that EPPs are right in the middle of preparing evidence for demonstrating alignment to the literacy standards. So they're right in it right now. So I can understand where that comment might be coming from.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Then we have a recommendation to accept. Do I have a motion? Mr. Warren Wills moves the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Hamby seconds. Education preparation rule. This is still on first reading, so it doesn't require a roll call vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item, educational licensure policy.
Thank you. This is the educator licensure policy, which details the requirements for issuance, renewal, advancement, and reactivation of all license types. This item proposes revisions to support alignment to the Tennessee Literacy Success Act. Specifically, we are identifying endorsements that would require completion of a foundational skills professional development course or an approved assessment. In addition, we are removing some dated requirements related to occupational licensure advancement, specifically observations and mentoring. These are already components of approved occupational preparation programs. Also, we're adding clarifying language to out-of-state pathways for additional endorsements. So if someone holds a license in another state, how do they go about adding endorsements to their Tennessee license? Lastly, we've worked with both the CTE team and the Office of Academics to add a few new endorsements in aviation maintenance, diesel technician, and as you all voted on in the rule over the last year, also the speech language pathology assistant endorsement. With that, I am happy to take any questions you may have.
Questions for Mr. Buerlein? Mr. Buerlein.
I just wanted to thank you for the work you're doing on this, and specifically the work that you do to help streamline and create opportunities relating to occupational trades. There's tremendous opportunity on that field. As an example, you've got diesel technician here. I think that is absolutely center of the target. So thank you for your work on that.
Thank you.
I've got a couple of comments, questions. On page 14, it says a classroom teacher with an endorsement in elementary education or early childhood education is eligible to teach any subject, including art and music in the grades. I think if they're phys ed, don't they have to have a phys ed endorsement?
That is
by the Cronin law?
correct.
So I think if we can fix that between first and second reading. It does say teachers in grades K through 8 who teaches art, music, or physical education for the major portion of the day shall be endorsed, but the sentence above says teach any subject. And so I think Tom Cronin might trump that statement. So if we can look at that and maybe fix that between first and second reading.
We will definitely take a look at that.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can you indicate where that's at on page 14? Just I want to make sure I have the correct section reference.
All I know it's on page 14. It starts with the classroom teacher with an endorsement. I'll have to.
Item D, if that helps.
Subsection D, got it. Thank you.
Okay. And then secondly, on the literacy law, it talks about any teacher has to have the training, correct? Am I in the right place here?
Yes.
And so I got a lot of comments from administrators about, they have a teaching license, but they're administrators.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of hours and time that they would be taking away from their administration if they had to take these courses and pass this test, et cetera.
Yeah.
So what's the situation there?
Yeah, I'd say one, It's critically important that anybody holding a teaching license, allowing them to teach K-3 reading, demonstrate that they've completed either an approved training or the assessment. Two, and you know, if need be, I could defer to Lisa Coons on this, but that week-long asynchronous training, I think, has been developed to support folks who are doing this in any form or fashion. So they really, it is a pretty flexible opportunity for them.
So the intent is that everyone would be required to take the course.
Anyone holding an endorsement that allows them to teach K-3 reading. Now, the rule that you'll vote on later does specify that, let's say you hold a teaching license that has a secondary math endorsement and an early childhood endorsement.
Mm-hmm.
You could choose to let that early childhood endorsement drop off your license and not complete the training and maintain your license just with the secondary endorsement. So there are some choices that folks have if they simply do not want to complete the training.
Okay. Did Dr. Coons have some comment?
Hey, I didn't know you were there.
I was hanging out in case you had a question. I am just volunteering myself to.
Thank you.
I appreciate the backup.
Any other questions? No questions. We have a recommendation for approval of the educator licensure policy. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Bolenhauer moves and Mr. Jensen seconds. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
All right. Last item, Tennessee academic standards for fourth year math courses.
Hello, Katherine Johnson, Deputy Director of Academic Policy with the State Board. I am here to present the Tennessee Academic Standards for fourth year mathematics courses. If you'll remember, in February 2021, this board did vote on final reading kindergarten through high school courses for our core subjects and courses. However, we as a state do offer several options for fourth year math courses to our students once they have completed their required high school courses. These did go through our full and comprehensive review process as outlined in state statute and are being recommended to you by the Standards Recommendation Committee for Mathematics. Some big changes that I want to highlight for you are we are aligning the state statistics standards to the statewide dual credit course to ensure that all students taking statistics have the opportunity to earn early post-secondary credit if they choose to take that challenge exam, but it will not be required if they are not enrolled specifically in the dual credit course. Also, Bridge Math has been removed as a course option in favor of merging sales with the statistics course. This is following national best practices and finding that statistics is better serving students going into higher education if they are not pursuing a science or mathematics route at that level. So it's going to better prepare them for entry-level mathematics courses at higher education institutions. So they'll still have that remedial aspect of sales with helping them get those foundational mathematics skills, but learning new content with statistics as well. The last change that I want to highlight is the course that was formerly called Applied Mathematical Concepts was overhauled to better expose students to concepts that will prepare them to enter the workforce, the military, or pursue a technical degree after high school. And this course is now called Mathematical Reasoning for Decision Making. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on these courses.
Any questions for Ms. Johnson?
Just one comment. I mean, I think this is another example of, again, feels a little bit sort of under the hood or inside baseball in terms of the standards piece, but aligning with workforce and the needs of our students in pursuing technical degrees and professions beyond high school. I think making these changes in the fourth year math options is really important to make sure that we've got an aligned system that starts in high school with the kinds of skills that are going to set students up for success, whether they're pursuing a 2-year degree, 4-year degree, or entering the workforce immediately upon graduation from high school.
And I would also like to make a comment. I know that we've continued to look at that fourth year math class. I know Victoria sits on the Tennessee Math Alignment Group. Dr. Owens does too. I hope we don't lose sight of maybe looking at engineering classes or other classes that have considerable math content that could meet that senior year. All people are required to take math during your senior year. And some students already have their 4 credits before they get to their senior year. And so I just continue to encourage that we will continue working on that.
We will definitely continue to look at that as a state board staff.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other comments or questions? Then we have a recommendation then for Tennessee Math Standards for 4th year. Do I have a motion?
Name.
Mr. Mullenhour moves and Mr. Morrow seconds.
Second.
Further discussion?
I believe Mr. Jensen made the motion.
Oh.
And Mr. Morrow seconded.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there you go. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That completes the items for first reading. I propose that we take a break, reconvene at 10:45. Okay. Items, action for final reading. Ms. Sanders, Personnel Policy.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Angie Sanders again, General Counsel for the State Board, presenting to you on final reading revisions to the Personnel Policy 1.300. In 2020, we revised this policy to formalize a delegation of authority to settle both matters filed in state and federal courts and matters filed in administrative court under the Uniform Administrative Procedures Act to state board attorney staff and to the Attorney General's office. Revisions on first reading were brought to clarify that delegation of authority to state if it is a matter filed in state or federal court, that the settlement also has to be approved by the Attorney General's office and any other required officers as required by law. And then also clarifying that any settlement of an administrative legal action is required to come before this board on the consent agenda. Since first reading, we have made one change, and that is to recognize a law that just recently passed this session, allowing for the executive director to appoint a designee to serve as the non-voting ex officio member of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. No other changes have been made, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Any questions for Ms. Sanders? No questions, so we have a recommendation for Personnel Policy 1300 on final reading. Do I have a motion? So moved. Mr. Cobbins moves. Do I have a second?
Second?
And a second. Any further discussion? No discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item, school attendance policy. Thank you, Ms. Sanders.
Hello again, Catherine Johnson, Deputy Director of Academic Policy for the State Board. I'm here to present the school attendance policy, which was initially approved by the board in January 2017. We are bringing forth changes to the policy to state that participation in 4-H sponsored events or activities are a circumstance in which students must be counted as present by their school and district. There have been no changes to this item from first reading.
No changes from first reading. Any questions? Yes, Mr. Wells.
Just a comment. I think this is a great move. As someone who works in the agricultural industry, 4-H is something that I think it builds so much character and leadership in our students. So I think it's a great move.
Thank you for the comments. Any other questions or comments? No questions. Do I have a motion to accept the school attendance policy? So moved. Mr. Jensen moves.
Second.
Mr. Morrill seconds. Any further discussion? No discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is Erica Light.
Good morning, Erica Light, Director of Research for the State Board of Education. I'm here to present to you item 4C, Professional Assessments for Tennessee Educators Policy 5.105. To become a licensed educator in Tennessee, state law and state board rules require certain individuals to demonstrate both content and pedagogical competencies through assessments. This policy, the Professional Assessments for Tennessee Educators Policy, currently states that the qualifying score for the EdTPA pedagogical assessment will increase on January 1st, 2023. The item before you today on final reading proposes to eliminate the scheduled increase in the EdTPA qualifying score. Even without this scheduled increase, Tennessee will still have one of the highest EdTPA qualifying scores in the nation. There have been minor edits to this item since first reading. These include addition of dates by which phased out assessments must be taken in order for the scores to be accepted for licensure, and some formatting updates to combine the Praxis Series and National Evaluation Series assessments into a single table, and finally the removal of reference to a policy appendix that no longer exists. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Yes, Mr. Moore. Oh.
One of the highest in the nation, you said. And I think what we heard yesterday and what I've talked to a lot of superintendents about, just the concern, and it's not really a concern on anything with, everybody wants high quality teachers, everybody wants competency in the classroom and high character and all of those things. So this really isn't that, but it's just more of a concern around supply and demand. When you listen to what we talked about from the EPPs and the percentages down, Mr. Eby talked about Williamson County. Are we thinking through unique strategies that don't lower an expectation for the competency of a teacher, and yet how do we open this funnel up to draw them in to the state and have people able to teach and superintendents have qualified candidates to teach? Like, is that a part of what we're looking at with all of this? I mean, I hear this and I get it, and it just keeps bringing that up to me of like, how do we open this funnel up?
Mm-hmm. Well, within this policy, or in the research that we've done behind this policy, we have found that our EPPs have done an incredible job over the past few years of preparing their candidates to take the EdCPA, which is a challenging performance-based pedagogical assessment.
Right.
We have seen a lot of progress in having the average score on that assessment increase over time, and also having decreasing discrepancies between educators from different backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, I think our EPPs have been doing an excellent job. I think the question that you're asking is a bit different and would fall outside the scope of this policy and is more related to the broader educator pipeline.
Okay.
And I know that the department has recently announced their new Grow Your Own
Right.
project, which has been ongoing for a while but is expanding.
Okay, thank you.
It is an intensive and performance-based assessment, as Erica said. So some of what you may be hearing is on the district side. There's a lot of work involved. There's a portfolio that candidates have to submit. It's very closely aligned, though, with like the team rubric that new educators and existing educators are evaluated on each year. So I think it's an important assessment, but it is one that we need to make sure continues to reflect and sort of prepare the pipeline for entry into the classroom. And if we feel that's not the case, then we'd want to revisit. But my guess is that's probably partly where the comments are coming from, because it's not even just one you sit down and take one time on the computer. I mean, it's extensive.
Other questions? So we have a recommendation for professional assessments for Tennessee Educator Policy 5105. Is there a motion to accept that recommendation? Policy. Mr. Cobbins moves.
Second.
Mr. Hamby seconds. Any last comments or questions? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Light. Next, civil compliance rule, Dr. Chandra Hersey, and this will require a roll call vote.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Chandra Hersey, and I'm a staff attorney with the Tennessee Department of Education, and I'm here to present the Civil Rights Rule on final reading. All recipients of federal financial assistance from the U.S. Department of Education must comply with federal civil rights laws, which include Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is found at 42 U.S.C. Section 2000D and its subsequent sections, and Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, which is found at 20 U.S.C. Section 1681 and its subsequent sections. This item presents a new rule outlining the department's oversight and investigation processes. This rule ensures consistency and transparency regarding department responsibilities in responding to complaints arising under Title VI and IX. To collect public feedback, the State Board staff held a rule-making hearing between first and final reading on March 31st, 2022. No public comments were received. Changes between first and final reading include adding language stating that the Tennessee Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights will maintain the confidentiality of investigative records that are confidential under the Tennessee Public Records Act or other state laws, edits to the rule chapter numbering, and minor clerical changes for clarity. The Tennessee Department of Education recommends acceptance of this item on final reading, and the State Board of Education staff concur with this recommendation. And with that, I can take any questions.
Any questions, Ms. Hersey? No questions. Can I have a motion to accept on final reading?
Nate, so moved.
Mr. Morrow moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Wells seconds. Mr. Griffin, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell. Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Hamby.
Aye.
Mr. Holt. Mr. Jensen. Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells.
Aye.
Madam Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you have 7 ayes.
Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Next item, educator licensure rule. Mr. Derline.
Michael Derline, Senior Director of Educator Licensure and Preparation at the department. This is the final reading item of the educator licensure rule. The first section governs the issuance, renewal, advancement, and reactivation of school services personnel licenses. And the second section in front of you governs endorsements issued on educator licenses. This rule addresses requirements set forth in the Tennessee Literacy Success Act, specifically regarding the processes and requirements for completing a professional development opportunity or a foundational skills literacy assessment. And this is accompanied with the policy that you all voted on first reading already. Since first reading, some edits have been made also to align with Public Chapter 932, which extends the ability of districts to request permits and endorsement exemptions for courses with an end-of-course exam through 2023 and 23-24. Additionally, some edits have been made for clarity. Happy to take any questions you may have.
Questions for Mr. Derline? No questions? Do I have a motion to accept this rule? Mr. Cobbins moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Mullenhour seconds. Requires a roll call vote. Mr. Griffin.
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell. Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Hamby.
Aye.
Mr. Holt. Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells.
Aye.
Madam Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you have 7 ayes.
Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Derline.
Thank you.
Next item, strategic compensation policy.
Good morning again. I'm Martha Moore, Senior Director of Educator Effectiveness with the Department of Education. I am presenting on Strategic Compensation Policy 5.600. This item seeks to add clarification to the language around differentiated pay plans and the timeline by which vacancy data must be submitted to ensure that the data collected are accurate and useful for both the department and districts. Specifically, it is important to identify vacancies that exist after the school year is underway and therefore are detrimental to student outcomes. Additional changes include further explanation in the component criteria section to ensure expectations for district implementation are clear. Differentiated pay plans must include at least one component from the following: hard-to-staff roles in schools, instructional roles and responsibilities, and performance. Should the district selected component for the implementation result in no payout for 2 consecutive years, the department will require the addition of a second eligible component until a payout occurs. This revision ensures districts meet the requirements of TCA 49.3.306. Revisions also include several clerical changes for consistent terminology throughout the policy. Between first and final reading, additional language has been added to increase clarity around the requirements for adding a second eligible component to ensure every district has an eligible differentiated pay plan. There is no specific fiscal analysis on the LEAs as they allocate the money from their own budgets. We do recommend approval of this item on final read, and I am happy to take any questions you might have about this item.
Questions? Mr. Mullenhour.
Just a couple of comments. Ms. Moore, thank you for your time and for your work on this. As we discussed earlier today, it's always important that we strive to remove ambiguities from the policies that we're promulgating over time, and I think this is an example where we need to address something. It's not one of the edits that you had proposed, Ms. Moore, although I have been in contact with board staff. I've also been in contact with the department staff on this issue. What I would like to do is propose an amendment. I'm just going to read it real quick. Propose an amendment to this policy on the top of page 3 of the clean copy. So if you have that, it's the top of page 3. You can just look at subsection A1. And that proposal is to amend paragraph 3(1)(a)(1) to strike the phrase schools with equity gaps / effective teaching gaps at the end of the paragraph and to replace it with schools with gaps in access to effective teachers. So this is a subsection that defines essentially what the phrase hard to staff. And what I'm suggesting that we do is we narrow the language to include the phrase access to effective teachers and not just this broad concept of equity gaps, which could be interpreted a lot of different ways and could stray far from the intent, I think, of this policy. Thank you.
Mr. Miller, where are you again now?
This is the top of page 3 of the clean copy, subsection A1, so it's the very top paragraph.
And read your suggested change again.
Sure. The proposal is to amend paragraph 3(1)(a)(1) to strike the phrase schools with equity gaps / effective teaching gaps at the end of the paragraph and to replace it with, quote, schools with gaps in access to effective teachers, unquote. And again, I conferred with both board staff and department staff on this.
We have you make that as a motion?
Yes, I will make a motion that we approve.
A motion to amend.
Subject to.
Make a motion to amend the language.
Okay. From a procedural standpoint.
Yeah, make a motion to approve the thing first and then make a motion to amend, correct?
Okay, so I'll make a motion to approve subject to the amendment that I'll state. Is that?
Mr. Chairman, it might be easier for the body to take up the amendment first and then to approve as amended.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll make a motion then that we approve policy 5.60, paragraph 3(1)(a)(1) to strike the phrase, quote, schools with equity gaps / effective teaching gaps, unquote, at the end of the paragraph and to replace it with, quote, schools with gaps in access to effective teachers, unquote.
Okay, do I have a second to that motion?
Second.
Mr. Hamby seconds. Are there any questions on the amendment?
One question.
Yeah, Mr. Cobbins.
Just for, I guess, the department in terms of quote-unquote equity gaps, what was your intent with that particular language? Is there something that we lose by removing that from the equation?
I believe, and we have discussed these edits, and I've talked about this with our PLA staff, I believe these are acceptable edits and continue to get to the meat of the policy, which is, are we getting good teachers in front of students in every school? So access to effective teachers, regardless of the type of school, is the goal of the strategic compensation policy, and rewarding those teachers for being effective. So I believe we are still implementing as desired with this change.
Further questions?
Just really a clarification. This is just adding on to the sentence that already exists. I'm looking at the right place.
Thank you for the question. Again, top of page 3,
Right here.
subsection A1. Yes, that is correct.
All right.
So what we're doing, if you look at the very last sentence of that paragraph, we're just replacing that phrase. Again, the phrase beginning with schools with equity gaps / effective teaching gaps, that phrase is being replaced with.
So just the second part of the sentence, it's not a full sentence, it's
Correct.
just a second comma,
Correct.
and then what you would say. Okay,
Yep.
great.
Thank
So
you.
it leaves all of those other parts that say significant populations of historically disadvantaged students, low income, special ed, rich, that's all stays, it's just adding to the end of that. Is that correct?
It is not, it is leaving everything except it is replacing the
After the last
that one
comma.
phrase, correct, that
Okay.
one phrase with the phrase that's
It's not
proposed.
after the last, it's changing the last the last
Comma
It's not
change.
changing the first part.
Right.
Right.
Correct.
Thank you, that's the easier way to ask that.
Any other questions? All right, so we'll vote on the amendment to change language. You want to read it one last time? Just be sure that people understand that last sentence.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, happy to do so. The proposal is to amend paragraph 3(1)(a)(1) to strike the phrase, quote, "schools with equity gaps / effective teaching gaps," unquote, at the end of the paragraph, and to replace it with, quote, "schools with gaps in access to effective teachers," unquote.
Okay. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I actually have a suggested change too. And mine is on the change that you had proposed, and let me read what I have here. It says, each differentiated pay plan shall have at least one component from the criteria below. And the LEA must be able to ensure implementation for the current school year. If a differentiated pay plan is based on a single component, and that component of the differentiated pay plan is not paid out for 2 consecutive years, then the addition of another second eligible component shall be required in the plan until at least one eligible payout is made. It's kind of confusing to me because it says you have to ensure payout in the current school year, but then it says if you don't do it in 2 years, so I think we need to change that language. And so what I would propose says each differentiated pay plan shall have at least one component from the criteria below. And the LEA must attempt to pay out that component for the current school year, and strike be able to ensure implementation for the current school year. And if a differentiated pay plan is based on a single component and the LEA is not able to pay out that component for 2 consecutive years, then the addition of another component shall be required until at least one eligible payout. So I think that just clarifies it a little better.
We encourage clarity. I think that is an excellent edit. Thank you.
So I will move to amend to that language. If you would you like me to reread the entire paragraph of what it says to see if it makes sense? All right. It says each differentiated pay plan shall have at least one component from the criteria below, and the LEA must attempt to pay out. Must be shall there, keeping consistent with all our must and shalls.
I think that's an acceptable edit as well on our side.
Shall attempt to pay out that component for the current school year. If a differentiated pay plan is based on a single component and the LEA is not able to pay out that component for 2 consecutive years, then the addition of another eligible component shall be required in the plan until at least one eligible payout is made. So I'll move for that. Can I have a second for that? Second. Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Any further questions or? All right, all in favor for this amendment signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed? That amendment carries. Are there any other comments or questions from Ms. Moore? Okay, if none, can I have a motion to accept the policy with the 2 amendments?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Jensen moves, Mr. Mullenhour seconds. Any further discussion? No discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, next item. Where are we? Special Education Programs and Services Rule.
Good morning, everyone.
Taylor Jenkins.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, my name is Taylor Jenkins, and I'm a staff attorney at the Department of Education. I'm here to present on final reading proposed changes to Chapter 520.01.09, Special Education Programs and Services. There are 2 proposed changes to rules in the chapter. First, we propose adding a provision to Rule .05, which will state that special education eligibility determinations shall be completed within 60 calendar days of receipt of parental consent for an initial evaluation. The proposed change to Rule .05 codifies a long-standing practice and will help ensure the timely provision of services to students with disabilities. And second, we propose adding a clarifying provision to Rule .15. The rule currently states that an LEA must notify a student's parents at least 10 calendar days before an IEP meeting to ensure that the parent has an opportunity to attend. The proposed clarification will simply note that the student's parents and the LEA can mutually agree to hold an IEP meeting within that 10 calendar day period. State board staff held a rulemaking hearing to gather public feedback between first and final read, but no public comments were received. As a result, no changes other than typographical changes have been made between first and final read. At this point, I am happy to answer any questions that you have about the proposed changes.
Any questions for Mr. Jenkins? You hit my button again when you said an LEA must notify. Again, I think that should be shall. You have shall in the next, so I think that probably needs to be changed.
Yes, I would agree with that change. Thank you.
All right.
I believe our chairman may have missed his calling as an English teacher.
Yeah, right. I'll have to I'll propose that as an amendment. Can I have a second for that?
Second.
And I guess since this is a rule, it has to be roll call, or can I lump it into the? Yeah, I know, but do I have to roll call the amendment? All right. Okay, all right. I understand that. So all in favor for accepting that change from must to shall, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. It's just the engineer in me wants to be consistent, I think. All right. Any further questions on this? Can I have a motion to accept this rule and as amended? Mr. Cobbins moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. No further discussion. Mr. Griffin, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell. Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Hamby.
Aye.
Mr. Holt. Mr. Jensen. Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells.
Aye.
Madam Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you have 7 ayes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, everyone.
Next item H, career exploration, awareness and advising and planning course standards.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and board members. I am Deborah Knoll. I'm Senior Director of Career Readiness at the Division of the College, Career, and Technical Education for the Tennessee Department of Education. It's a pleasure to be here today to present this item on final reading. This item includes new and revised career exploration courses, as well as 2 additional courses, career awareness and career advising and planning. All courses have been created in collaboration with post-secondary faculty, industry representatives, and middle school counselors. These courses are a progression of courses for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. These courses provide students the opportunity to deepen their awareness of their individual strengths, values, and educational goals as it relates to college and career readiness. Based on additional feedback during the first reading of these courses, revisions were made to include a progression of standards to encourage entrepreneurship throughout all grade levels. The Department of Education recommends approval on this item on final reading, and the State Board staff concurs with this recommendation. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and at this time, I'd be happy to address any questions you may have.
I'm sure Mr. Mollenauer will have a comment about the entrepreneurship class.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank you, Ms. Knoll, for your work on this and for your willingness to receive feedback and make positive changes. And I know that there's a lot of underlying effort that goes into this, and there's, I think, a lot of opportunity that will be created across a wide spectrum of careers and future opportunities for our kids. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Mr. Jensen.
Ms. Knoll, I want to thank you as well. Mr. James and I were in 2 West Tennessee high schools on Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon, and it was very impressive what we saw. It was Peabody High School in Trenton and then Milan High School. And to be perfectly honest, I was dumbfounded in a very positive way about what's going on in those 2 schools. And if we could replicate that across the state, we got to be in a leadership position in the country in terms of the opportunity, the thinking, the passion. The folks at Milan said, I think they had 96% of their seniors had, I think she said, a path and a plan. So they're headed out, and of their 130 plus students, they had 35% that were I think, bound for college, but there were 65% who are going on a career path. And I just think back 10 years, could we sit in this room and answer that question? I expect the answer would be no. And so it's just encouraging, and to fellow board members, I would encourage you to find out those high schools in your district and go see what they're doing, because it's remarkable. So thank you for that, and I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Other comments? I'll just add on that I'm really glad to see this 6th to 8th grade start planning. I mean, that is the time that they need to plan, start thinking about where they want to get to, and it's just great that we're bringing that into the middle schools. Thank you.
If I can add another comment, that's one of the questions I've been asking going around. When should we start talking to kids? And I've had 7th and 8th grade, but I had 4th grade and kindergarten. And I just think, it's just a change of mindset for all of us to think that way. And I just encourage that kind of thinking.
Any other comments? All in favor then for accepting this, signify by saying, obviously, do I have a motion yet or not?
So moved.
You have one now.
Motion to approve.
Yeah, all right. Yeah,
Second.
And second.
all right. Any further discussion then? And is this a rule or a policy? Pardon?
It's just standards.
Just a rule? So, that's a standard, so it require roll call vote? Doesn't? Yeah, right. Okay, sorry. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Great.
I
Thank
do
you.
have to give Chairman Hartgrove, how she keeps all these balls in the air is pretty good, so it's gets
Doing
kind of
great.
confusing sometimes. So, Dr. Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Amy Owen with the State Board of Education. I have an item with textbook and instructional materials waiver requests from several LEAs. For about 2 years now, it has been one of the responsibilities of the board to act on textbook and instructional materials waiver requests that can be made by districts in certain circumstances. In some cases, it is during the regular state adoption cycle for a given subject. If a district wishes to use something that is not on the state approved list, they could make a request at that time for a waiver. There are also other scenarios where districts can request waivers if they're opening a virtual school for the first time, or if they seek to offer for the first time a course for which there is no state approved book. And so we have LEAs that are in some of those circumstances here today. I should note Rutherford County's adult high school is a virtual adult high school. This is a collaborative process with the Department of Ed because they, of course, have these subject matter experts who help us review these courses and the proposed waivers in great depth to make sure that the instructional materials align with the Tennessee academic standards. And again, we have a collaborative process to make sure they meet other requirements in state law and in state board rule for granting textbook waivers. So in this case, most of the waiver requests are recommended for approval based on that review process involving both the department content experts and also the state board staff looking for those other criteria that are in rule. There is one that is recommended for denial. Houston County proposed an online course from a vendor regarding sociology, and that one, again, some of the content that was identified would run afoul of some recent state statutes. So other than that, these are recommended for approval. And I will say that Houston County had other social studies elective courses that they proposed, so this would not prevent them with moving forward with their plans for a virtual school. And I'm glad to take any questions you have. I know this is still a newer process for the state board.
Any questions for Dr. Owen? No questions. Can I have a motion to accept the recommendation then?
So moved.
Mr. Mullenhour moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Hamby seconds. Any further discussion? No discussions. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
AMOs.
Hello, nice to see you all again. Rachel Maves, Chief of Preparation and Performance. I'm here to present on the 21-22 Annual Performance Goals, or the Annual Measurable Objectives, also known as AMOs. TCA 491602 requires the State Board of Education, in conjunction with the Commissioner, to establish appropriate performance goals and measures for schools and LEAs. The performance goals and measures must include, at a minimum, student achievement, student growth, and other appropriate indicators of performance. Annual performance goals known to our schools as annual measurable objectives, or AMOs, provide schools and districts with targets that help interpret recent performance and prioritize future goals. Tennessee sets each of these targets individually for each school and district and for each student group, using the most recent available performance as the starting point for each goals. AMO targets are calculated for the following indicators: achievement, growth, chronic absenteeism, English as a second language proficiency, graduation rate, and ready graduate. School and district AMO targets expect schools and districts to decrease by half the percent of students whose performance does not meet the standard over the course of 8 years. Double AMO targets expect the percent of students not meeting the standard to decrease by half in 4 years. These targets align with the requirements of federal accountability and the Every Student Succeeds Act and provide measurements for all student groups, which include economically disadvantaged students, students from major racial and ethnic groups, students with disabilities, and English learners. AMOs are also used in the calculation of school letter grades as required by TCA 491228. Chapter 2 of the Public Acts of 2021, in the first extraordinary session, prohibited the use of 2021 TCAP assessment data for school and LEA accountability, including the calculation of letter grades, if the district achieved over 80% participation rate on the TCAP, which all of our districts did. All LEAs exceeded this participation threshold in the 2021 year. Because AMOs are used in the calculation of letter grades, Public Chapter 2 effectively prohibited TCAP assessment data from the 2021 school year from being included in the calculation of AMOs, even if such data was used solely as a baseline measure of performance. In 2022, Public Chapter 782 was passed by the General Assembly to revise the language from Public Chapter 2 that prohibited the use of 2021 TCAP data in AMOs, and to authorize the department to use the results from the TCAP tests administered in the 2021 school year as a baseline to set the AMOs for schools and LEAs for the 21-22 year. Therefore, the department has calculated the 21-22 AMOs using 2021 TCAP data. So for today, TCA 491212 requires that the department prepare a fiscal analysis of any policy, rule, or regulation proposed to the state board, and there is no fiscal impact on LEAs. The Department of Education recommends approval of this item on first and final reading, and the SBE staff concurs with this recommendation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Question for Dr. Mays. Let me just say this is a great example, I think, of how the department, the state board, the districts all worked with the legislature to get it right.
Yeah.
Can I have a motion to accept? Motion by Mr. Covens, accept. Motion, a second to that motion?
Second.
Mr. Morrow. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is state minimum salary schedule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Good morning. My name is Charlie Bufalino, and I am the Assistant Commissioner of Policy and Legislative Affairs at the Department. And I am pleased to present to you a proposed increase to the state minimum salary schedule for the upcoming 22-23 school year. Pursuant to Tennessee Code Annotated 493306A1, the Commissioner of Education is required to annually present to the State Board of Education for approval a state salary schedule for licensed personnel. The salary schedule must include a base salary for licensed personnel with a bachelor's degree and 0 years of experience. The State Board of Education shall then determine a percentage of any increase in funds appropriated to the instructional salaries and wages component of the BEP for a fiscal year compared to the previous year. Under this proposal, we are proposing that the current minimum salary schedule, which includes a base salary of $38,000, be increased to $40,000. Additionally, the FY23 budget includes approximately $125 million in improvements for instructional salaries under the instructional salary component of the BEP. Because the BEP is a funding and not a spending plan, each district will utilize its salary component funding increase to meet its unique compensation needs. However, 100% of that $125 million improvement must be spent on educator compensation, including salary or insurance benefits. However, under the law, any district that is below the statewide average must utilize those funds strictly for salaries and not benefits in order to meet the increase to the proposed base salary. I also would just sort of like to add, for purposes of a little bit of background and context, this continues to be a major priority for Governor Lee and Commissioner Schwinn for us as a state to aggressively raise teacher salary. We talked a lot at the workshop yesterday about vacancies and retaining high-quality educators. This is a key component of that. You can expect the administration to continue to try to be aggressive in raising teacher salaries going forward. And I also would like to note for this group that while we have continued to provide increases in recent years, we did have a year where we didn't, back in 2019-20. In that year, we did not propose a salary increase. So by continuing to be aggressive and raise this from $38,000 to $40,000, I think we are back to being sort of more on track with where we're headed as a state. But certainly that journey doesn't end here today. And in transitioning from the BEP to the Tennessee Investment and Student Achievement Act, we will continue to try to aggressively fund teacher salaries going forward. And with that, this item is recommended for approval on first and final reading from department staff, with state board staff concurring, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Buffalino? No questions. Keep that aggressive approach.
We will, sir. Thank you.
Do I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
Mr. Mullenhour moves. Do I have a second? Mr. Jensen seconds. Any? Oh, was it Mr. Morrow second?
No, he's got it. Either way.
Any further discussion? Okay, let's vote. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, before Mr. Buffalino sits down, I'd like to raise a question related to the prohibited coursework. I think we had an emergency rule that carried through May the 7th, and then I think the department has the responsibility to come back and provide guidance or rules on that. And the question, when I read it, it's like, how is a teacher going to know? And I don't need an answer right now, but it seems like this is important, whether they are inside or outside of the guidance on those courses. When you read it, it says that the complainant can bring up pretty much anything. And so I'm just a bit concerned that we have clarity, and I presume we're going to have some rules before the academic year starts next year. So I don't know what the status of that is, but I'd like to
I can share an update.
Better understand that.
So you were referring to the prohibited concepts in public instruction rule. So under the law that was passed 2 years ago, the Commissioner of Education was charged with withholding state funds if any district was found to be in violation of that law. The department then took the step to provide clarity to districts of promulgating a rule specific to what a complaint process would look like. That's not a State Board of Education rule. That's one that the department proposed and promulgated internally due to the direct impact of the commissioner being charged to essentially administer and carrying out that law by the legislature. There was an emergency rule that's in effect, and we're in the process of promulgating a permanent rule now. A public hearing was held in late March. Some of that feedback was taken into account, and we are going through the process of finishing that sort of out, and we'll be ahead of the Government Operations Committee at some point to present that rule to them like we did the emergency rule. Now, I will state there is not a role for the department outlined in that law for us to provide specific guidance of how districts or teachers are to implement that. If there are questions about what's in compliance and what's not, districts have their own board attorneys to help them sort of navigate that process. Our rule and our role is very specific to the complaint process, both what will happen locally and then the process to appeal that to the state to adjudicate final decisions on that front. I hope that helps to answer your question.
I guess we're getting ready to go into the licensure discussion in a few minutes. I'm just concerned that it just seems wide open to me, and I look forward to seeing the revised law, what you're saying we ought to do going forward. But as I read that, it just seemed pretty wide open, and seems like there's a risk there for teachers to be well-intended and find themselves under a complaint and have to defend themselves or whatever. So just some clarity on that I hope we get to see before too long.
Well, and I would say, Mr. Jensen, too, that may be an issue that this board wants to engage with the legislature on going forward. I mean, ultimately, it's that law that governs how we all sort of have to proceed in that context, and that's how we've tried to approach the rulemaking portion of it that we've been trying to carry out to date.
Mr. Brooklyn, I have one comment before you sit down.
Please.
Unrelated to what was just discussed, I admire and appreciate the governor's office and the department in striving to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. I think that's part of your job, and I think that both generally do it very well. I also understand that there's a tension in wanting to award and incentivize teachers, and to do that in an environment where we have high inflation rates, where we have, frankly, a cost of living in Tennessee that's accelerating much faster than the average across the nation. And I think we have to all just recognize that, as our chairman said a few moments ago, that aggressive posture is needed to support the people who are working each day to serve our students. And I would also encourage you to continue pushing hard on that. We are in a macroeconomic environment right now that I think decisively requires that. So thank you for your work on that front.
Thank you for that comment, and I can, on behalf of the governor's office and the department, we fully agree with that, and we'll continue to proceed accordingly.
Yes, Mr. Wells.
This may have been more appropriate yesterday in the workshop when we were talking about vacancies, but with all the increases in the minimum salary, where are we ranking, I guess? I mean, nationally, I'd like to ask nationally, but I think with the cost of living is probably a little bit different. What about in the southeast, maybe? We have so many states that border us where people can live in Chattanooga and drive across the border to Georgia. So I was just curious.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I have the precise stats in front of me or if a colleague might sort of have that, but there recently was something, and this is a resource we can send to you, where the Southern Regional Education Board kind of produced a dashboard of looking at this and comparing it. And it really depends on whether you're looking at kind of overall salaries or maybe the benefit sort of package of that too. And Tennessee is certainly moving up in those rankings and getting more aggressive, but I think it's fair to say there's a lot more room for growth on that front, or more that we can do. But that's something that we'd be happy to pull for you and get some more of that information to you and your colleagues if they're interested.
As you're looking at that and the administration's looking at that, is there a goal we want to reach that we're trying to get to 35th or 2nd or what? I was just curious.
I don't think we've stated a public goal in terms of ranking. I mean, we've talked about getting to $45,000, I think, by 2025 was the sort of stated goal. 2026, excuse me, was the stated goal. So we've talked about that as a means to go to. Less of a focus sort of, I think, on rankings, but at the end of the day, it's to try to be as aggressive as possible and be as competitive as possible compared to our border states in that regard.
And I'll jump in really quick. The beginning of 2019, we were at 34,000, just to give you a sense of kind of what that increase has looked like over time. Tennessee right now, our average overall salary is $51,862. The regional average is $55,205. The national average is $64,133. So it gives you a sense. Our cost of living index is at 88.5% compared to the Southeast, which is just over 95%.
That brings up a good question. Do we look, when we set that minimum salary, how much do we look at the cost of living index? Because the commissioner you just said we want to get to 45 by 2026. So that's 4 years from now. Well, from 40 to 45, that's 1/8. That's 12.5% increase over the next 4 years. So normally when we're in 2% inflation, that sounds great. But when we're in 8.5% inflation, that doesn't sound great. So do we use that cost of living index to set the minimum salary schedule, or how is that put together?
Yes, we do look at that, and I think the other thing I would say, though, is we're really governed here by how much funding is appropriated by the legislature to make these sort of increases and raises. So when those proposals happen with the governor's office and finance and administration, they're really looking at all of those factors to try to pull it together. But when we come to you and have a proposed increase, we're not going to come to you and propose a really large increase if the funding hasn't been provided to do that, because then locals are going to be left holding the bag and have to raise additional funds locally to compete with that. So it's really driven through the appropriations process more than anything, but I know those factors are looked at.
But I would assume that you, representing the department, would go to the legislature and say, here's, look at the cost of living, and here's where we are, and so.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. Good discussion. Any other comments or questions from Mr. Buffalino? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman.
Next item, special course approvals.
I am here again to talk about the final reading of the 2022-23 special course approvals. State Board of Education Rule 521-3-5 and Special Courses Policy 3.201 allow local education agencies the ability to apply to offer special courses not listed in the State Board's approved high school course policy 3.205. The Department of Education annually reviews special course and special program of study applications and assigns specific course codes to special courses approved for 1, 3, or 6 years. This item presents for the board's approval the list of all special course applications received by the department for the 22-23 school year, along with their approval recommendations and, if applicable, the number of years for which the special course is recommended for approval. This does not include rule or policy revisions, and it has no financial impact on the LEA. The Department of Education recommends approval of this item on first and final read. The State Board of Education staff concurs with this recommendation.
Any questions for Dr. Coons? No questions. We have a recommendation. Do I have a motion? Motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Hamby. Second by Mr. Mullenhour. No further discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed with a nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Coons. Next item is high school policy. Dr. Amy Orr.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Amy Owen with the State Board of Education. I have some minor changes to the high school course, the high school policy 2.103, which provides further definitions to state board rules regarding requirements for grades 9 through 12. At the request of several LEAs, we are making a clarification regarding grades for credit recovery. In the current policy, it states that students who earn course credit through a credit recovery option shall earn a grade of a 70, which is the lowest passing grade in a course. However, we heard from several districts that have locally adopted grading policies on a different scale, where a 70 is not the lowest passing grade in a course. It might be a C-, it might be something that's a little bit higher. And they wanted the flexibility that in their local grading policy, they should simply award them the lowest possible passing grade. So again, districts are not required to have these local grading policies. They must use the uniform grading policy. They can also use the local grading policy, but we wanted to propose that as a revision because it will help out some of our districts. I will note that a law passed this session that will change Tennessee's uniform grading policy over the next several years to a 10-point scale. So at some point in the future, this will be less of a necessity, but for this upcoming school year, it is still important. We also have one final edit to catch a quick change from the 2022 legislative session regarding qualifications for a student to earn a graduation distinction as a TriStar Scholar. And we would like these to be in effect so that LEAs can update any local grading or credit recovery policies that they need to over the course of the summer. So we are recommending approval on first and final reading.
Any questions for Dr. Owens? I think on 3.5, we have a must that should be a shall, maybe. I'm on the right. Student who fulfills the requirements of the Tennessee Work Ethic Distinction Program must also be recognized, shall be recognized.
Thank you. We can correct that, yes. Would you like to?
I guess I'll move to make that correction.
Sure.
You have a second? Second. All in favor for the amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Any other questions on high school policy?
We're going to start doing a little control F on every item to find the musts and make sure they're shalls.
Can I have a motion to accept the high school policy as amended?
Second.
Mr. Jensen moves, Mr. Hamby seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Before you leave, this is Dr. Owen's final official presentation in front of for the board, and we just can't thank you, every one of us, for what you've done to help make our job so much easier. And she's going off to work with Excel and Ed and going to be doing some great things there, and we will continue to have conversations with her throughout. But I couldn't let this pass by without us giving you a round of applause.
Oh, no. Well, thank you all so much. It's really been a privilege to work with all of you and to serve Tennessee students, and I look forward very much to keeping in touch moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item, school board training policy.
Good morning, Allie Gaffey, Director of Engagement and Accountability for the State Board. On first and final reading is a new policy which serves as a companion piece to our State Board rule regarding the annual training requirements for local school board members. In July 2021, you all approved the appointments of a school board training advisory committee, and they were tasked with reviewing and recommending training courses for your approval. The committee met once in September to approve an application, and then again this past March and April to review the 23 applications we received. They provided feedback to applicants and ultimately made the recommendations that you see before you in this policy today. The committee voted to recommend 19 of the 23 applications for approval, and those 4 courses that were not approved or recommended rather will have the opportunity to apply again next year if they so choose. The training courses that you approved today are valid for 3 years and will be available for local school board members to complete their annual training requirements. And with that, happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Allie? I'll just say that I had the honor to sit on that advisory training committee, and that committee was run very well, very rigorous. I think the recommendations here are outstanding.
Thank you.
Can I have a motion to accept then the training policy?
So moved.
Mr. Mullenhour moves. Do I have a second? Second. Mr. Jensen seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is
Charter school government.
Charter school government. Allie Gaffey.
Yes. So the next item is also first and final reading today. It is the State Board policy that includes the list of certified and approved training courses. These are for charter school governing body members to complete as part of their annual training requirements that is also outlined in State Board rule. There are 9 newly proposed courses to be added this year, one of which is designed to serve the governing body for Freedom Prep Academy Charter School, and then also 8 one-hour courses from the Tennessee Charter School Center. All of the courses were reviewed and certified by the Tennessee Charter School Center and then evaluated again by our staff before presenting them to you all for approval. These courses are also approved for 3 years and available to charter school governing body members to complete their annual training requirements. Happy to answer any questions on this one as well.
Questions for Ms. Gaffey? I have one suggested change, and it's not a must or shall. It's 520-140107. It says new governing body members may select any course approved for new governing body members listed in Table 1 or Table 2, as long as all required training topics, and I think we need to include specified in State Board Rule 5201 are covered. So I would recommend that we delineate that it's the topics that are specified in the rule are covered. So I'll make that motion. Can I have a second for it? Second. Any discussion? All in favor, signify to the amendment, signify by saying aye. Aye. And this is a rule, correct?
Policy.
Policy. This is a policy. Then we can say all in favor of accepting the policy as amended, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we go into licensure actions, I would like to ask Dr. Penny Schwinn to give us just a brief statement on some thoughts and what's going on in the department. It's very active, obviously, and we'd like to hear from you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And it is quite active. So we are in the throes of a lot of different projects and strategic initiatives. The ones that you will hear me speak about more regularly, because it is part of our Best for All strategic plan, which is really anchored on academics, student readiness, and educators. So for academics, we've got obviously Reading 360. That's been the big initiative. We are in our second year of that. We are excited about having more teachers in the early literacy professional development this summer, extending that up to our upper elementary, middle, and high school teachers. We've had quite a number who are signing up, which is always a good sign. The early data, again, with universal screeners, the window closes today, so we will be able to have that spring and kind of the beginning fall to spring data for universal screeners later this summer. But we're really excited to be able to look at how students who were in summer programs, who have been part of Reading 360 in terms of their teachers and districts participation, and certainly Tennessee All-Core, how they've performed and grown over time. But as you heard yesterday, the early data is very, very encouraging in terms of rate of growth, especially in a few of those grade levels. I think the other kind of components of academics are really looking at Tennessee All-Core. We do have the 150,000 seats for the district partnerships. We also have the Connected Literacy Program, which is for our 4 urbans. Those parents will then have micro grants to provide literacy tutoring for their students after school. It includes soon to be a high school tutoring program, so high school students will have free online access to tutoring on demand. And then community grants, which we'll be awarding in the next week, just about $20 million to community organizations across the state to provide high dosage, low ratio tutoring for students. All in all, it's a $200 million investment. We expect that it will impact over 200,000 students in the state. And we are very excited again with kind of the early data, progress walkthroughs, the internal district benchmarks in terms of how they're looking at their students in reading. Similarly, we partner with Zern. It is a math program specifically for Tennessee All-Core, and it does have an online monitoring component to see student growth month over month. We are seeing very, very good progress in kind of this first pilot semester, but we'll have some data this summer. And then summer programming, you're all welcome on the bus tour. So we will be going to 50 more districts this summer. We went to 50 last summer, and we'll go to 50 more this summer. It is a kind of 7 to 10 day swing across all 3 grand divisions. It is the best thing you will ever do because it is all full of joy and rigor. And so you will see students, if you are interested in seeing baby chicks hatch or playing kickball or robot wars, strong literacy instruction, or having a tarantula on your head, all of you will have a place on our bus tour. So it has been truly, I think, in my professional career, one of the best things that I've seen, because there are teachers who are kind of getting back to that joy and love of teaching, what's been a really hard few years, and students who are at that approaching and below category, especially in middle school, who kind of raise their hand and talk to you and say, this is the first time where I'm quote unquote the smart kid in the class, or I'm the first person to raise my hand. So we'll have some really good academic data this summer, but I think the other things we want to be able to quantify a little bit better is kind of just the confidence that we're seeing.
When will that tour be?
The tour starts June 1st, and genuinely, you're all invited and welcome. It's a ball. We don't stop for food, so you do have to pack a lunch because we just got to go, and the team knows that. So we're really thrilled on academic student readiness, of course. I think kind of a landmark $500 million investment in innovative school models. So every high school will be eligible for $1 million, every middle school $500,000. You heard Deborah Knoll speak about that earlier. It is a chance to completely transform how we think about that middle school to high school to post-secondary pathway. It is the largest investment in this kind of work, and we're very excited to launch the planning process this summer and fall, and then certainly start to see those programs build on the great work in our innovative school model pilot that we did through our federal relief funding. So it's hundreds of schools that will be able to just rethink what high school means for kids to make it meaningful, early college credit, certainly getting more industry certifications and such. And then for educators, grow your own, all things grow your own, never stops. We're very excited about the apprenticeship work, some early data there. And then our big next is TISA, which is, just a small little thing, just $1 billion. But it is, I do believe that part of what districts have done really well, because that's just kind of the department's lens, it doesn't work if it's not implemented well. And so we've really had to focus on implementation. And I do want to commend the districts because I'm very optimistic about what our state data will say. This cycle of assessment, I think that is a testament to their very hard and good work. And I think a deep appreciation that the department has, and I know the state board staff share with the collaboration and partnership with our excellent districts. Our teachers have been working really hard, and we're just very grateful for it.
Thank you. And if for the board members, if you do have the opportunity when the summer bus tour comes into your district, by all means, I recommend you go participate in it. And if you get in a kickball game, be sure that Dr. Schwinn is on your side. She can play kickball in high heels better than any of us can.
Can we get a schedule on that? That'd be helpful.
Okay, next, we'll now move into the teacher licensure discipline. And what I recommend is that we address all these except for one in a group. Item C, Jerica Parrish, we do have speakers for that, and so we're going to pull that out. But if we could, if the board is okay, and it will recall roll call, all the other items we'll address at once.
All right, yeah, good morning again. It's Todd Madison, staff attorney for the board, here with staff attorney Candace Carter, presenting the recommendations for licensure discipline. You wanted to take item C after the collective?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
we'll do A through I, and then.
All right, so we'll take any questions or further discussion on those items at this time.
Any questions on A, B, D, E, F, G, H, or I? No questions? Then can I have
And a J. There's a J item.
H, I, and J. Do I have a motion then to accept the recommendation? Mr. Cobbins moves. Do I have a second for that?
Second.
And just to clarify, the recommendation being to
Accept the discipline actions recommended by,
all A through J except for C. That's the motion.
correct, yes.
Correct.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any further questions? Okay, Mr. Griffin, will you do a roll call?
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell. Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Hamby.
Aye.
Mr. Holt. Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells.
Aye.
Madam Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you have 7 ayes.
Motion carries. Next, Mr. Madison, you want to take the individual case?
Yes, so item C, for Jerica Parrish. Ms. Parrish has requested to speak today. So
if you want to come, and I understand you and there's one other one to speak, each be limited to 3 minutes.
Good morning.
Go ahead.
My name is Jerica Parrish, and I'm here to talk on my case. In December of 2021, I was denied my application of licensure due to a matter that had a default judgment in the state of Texas on July 24th, 2020. Based off of the public record, I was accused of striking 2 students. It was struck from the record that I was breaking up a physical altercation after calling security. They went into default judgment because I did not give a response, based of which I did not give a response. They sent They sent respondents to me in August of 2019, almost almost a year after it happened, and I had already moved from the state of Texas back to Tennessee, so I did not get any of their responding mail. And yes, that's pretty much it.
Okay. Thank you. And there's somebody else that wants to speak too, is that right?
Yes, my principal.
My name is Daphne Swift. I'm the assistant principal at Lawrence, and Ms. Parrish has been working with us for this past school year. She was brought to us through the district as a person of hire, and Ms. Parrish has worked as a sixth grade math teacher for the entire year. And in that position, I came as a character because I don't know anything about what happened in Texas, but I do know of the character that I saw at Lawrence for this school year. And Ms. Parrish has worked tremendously in that sixth grade position. As you know, as a board, middle school math is a difficult area to fill. And filling that position with Ms. Parrish was one of the best decisions that Lawrence made. And you will see that when our data comes out. Ms. Parrish came in, she worked to build relationships with students. She has done a tremendous job moving students from below to on track and mastery. And with her character the way it is at Lawrence, I've seen nothing but positive things for her. And I know, as a board, you know, it is very difficult to find teachers at this time. And when we have someone who is young, willing, and able, she knows her content, she's strong in the content, and she knows how to build rapport with students, I am coming to you, asking you to make a decision to be able to keep Ms. Parrish with us because she knows how to move students, knows how to move the data, and she encourages students, and students are loving math, which is different than just learning math. So I am here to support Ms. Parrish in getting her license. Thank you.
Thank you. Pardon? Sure, you had a little bit of time left. Go ahead.
I also wanted to state that this is the matter happened and it resulted in permanent revocation of my paraprofessional certification. So that issue, even though I've tried to appeal it, they said I've went over the appeal process due to not being aware of the situation. So I haven't been able to correct that matter and address them and how to go about that process. So as I'm going to a different state, I'm still fighting what's going on in Texas. Yeah.
So you're still trying to get the Texas issue resolved, is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir, I am. And there was no immediate threat. I was still at the school working throughout the investigation and almost to the end of the year until my health kind of resulted in a different situation. But I was there throughout the process, so I was unsure as to why it kind of resulted in this.
Thank you. Let me ask Mr. Madison or Ms. Carter, one of them to provide some additional context here, please.
Yes, Candace Carter, staff attorney for the State Board of Education. The recommendation came based on the determination from Texas and the allegations therein, which did involve violations that if they occurred in Tennessee schools would allow us to take action in Tennessee. We don't have jurisdiction or authority to adjudicate what happened in Texas. So unfortunately, until that does get resolved, we're unable to make any further determination based on the facts alleged in that decision to revoke the license in Texas. And so we cannot make the recommendation for approval of a license or permit in Tennessee.
Thank you. Any questions for our attorneys or anything?
Just as a new board member here, to help me understand the process here is, do we have an option to roll this until she works on it in Texas, or do we have to make a decision now?
She does have the opportunity to reapply at any time. So if there are new information or new circumstances that are relevant to her particular situation, there's nothing prohibiting her from reapplying for licensure in Tennessee.
So we, not necessarily to roll it now, Lauren, but that we could revisit. That was what I was going to clarify to you with you, Candace, is that this is something that may come back before the board if the facts change in terms of information coming from Texas regarding her case.
Yeah, that's probably a better way to put it. This is the final decision as of right now, but there's always opportunity.
Correct.
Was what I was trying to clarify. Thank you.
Correct.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Mullenhour.
Just a few thoughts. Of all the things that we do here, and of all the research and the reading and the work that's done, I would consider safeguarding the kids as probably the foremost responsibility that we have, and I say we being the board, and in particular the board staff, Todd and Candace. And on the one hand, we are deeply grateful for the work that any teacher is doing to whether it's in math or any other course, to engage kids and to bring them along. And I would encourage Ms. Parrish, to the extent that you are making a difference in kids' lives, I hope that you continue to find that rewarding, and I hope that you continue to find a path forward, regardless of what's decided here today. But I'm reminded that is the most important thing we're doing, is to develop structure, develop framework, to equip the staff team to do their job and do it well, and to make recommendations based on the facts that we have at hand. I think, unfortunately, in this particular case, we're not here to ultimately adjudicate what happened in Texas. What we're here doing today is taking the facts that we know, which are few at this point, and trying to make sure that we uphold our duties to safeguard the well-being of the kids. Again, unfortunately, it sounds like there's a procedural complication originating in Texas that puts us in a bit of a difficult situation here. But I will say for myself and Ms. Parrish, I do not want you to take this wrong. I hope that you continue again to find inspiration to teach kids, because there are just so few facts, and it's but because there's so little information for us to go off of, and what little bit of information we do have is what appears to be a fairly thorough investigation that occurred back in Texas that alleged a number of things, some of which you've mentioned, others of which you have not today. That's, in my mind, the most relevant set of facts that we have. And again, unfortunately, it may or may not ultimately be true, but that's the information that we have to go off of. So I intend to vote to approve the recommendation of the staff, and I realize that it's a difficult call, and Ms. Parrish, I hope that you continue to find your work in this field to be fulfilling, regardless of what happens here today. But I think we do have to be mindful of the much bigger responsibility that we have to carry.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
One question.
Mr. Wells.
Go ahead.
I guess it's for Ms. Parrish, and I had a little bit of trouble hearing you. There was some noise in the background. Do you feel that you understand what the process is in Texas to get that taken care of, or are you still trying to figure that out? And before you answer that, I agree with Mr. Mullenhour on what our responsibility is here. But we also have an assistant principal here that is giving a character witness for her, who also has that responsibility even more closer than we do in some ways. And so I don't take that lightly. So I appreciate both of you being here. I know this is not an easy thing, but if you could answer my first question.
I'm still in the process of learning what needs to be done in order to appeal this revocation. All I've been told thus far by multiple people of the investigations unit is that the appeal process is over. So I'm digging further and further to try to come up with ways of trying to overturn that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Morrow. That was the address. Okay. Any other questions? We have a recommendation. Oh, Darrell, yes.
very difficult situation here. Understanding all the facts, understanding Principal Swift and her comments, and definitely appreciate you being here to advocate for an educator who you have great faith and confidence in. Ms. Parrish, I would encourage you to keep pushing in Texas. As you see in Tennessee, we're sort of, hamstrung might not be the right word, but we're limited in terms of the action we can take on this issue by virtue of, what we know from the state of Texas. And so, I appreciate you coming here to advocate for yourself, for your profession, for your career, and just want to encourage you to keep fighting for that issue in Texas, which then would allow things to be addressed here in Tennessee more readily. So thank you for coming out today.
Yeah, I don't think I could say it any better than how it's already said. I totally agree with the comments that have been made. And we do have a recommendation. Is there a motion to accept the recommendation?
So moved.
Mr. Mullenhour moves to accept the recommendation of the staff attorneys. Is there a second? I'll second that motion. This is by roll call vote.
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell. Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Hamby.
Aye.
Mr. Holt. Mr. Jensen. Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells.
Aye.
Madam Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you have 7 ayes.
The motion passes. Next item is DHS licensure actions. Mr. Madison.
Yes, sir. We have two for automatic action due to failure to comply with court-ordered child support obligation. It's automatic pursuant to statute. So just looking for board's final approval.
We have a recommendation. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Morrow moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Hamby seconds. Any further questions or conversations? If not, Mr. Griffin, please call the roll.
Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell. Mr. Eby.
Aye.
Mr. Hamby.
Aye.
Mr. Holt. Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Mr. Mullenhour.
Aye.
Mr. Morrow.
Aye.
Mr. Wells.
Aye.
Madam Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you have 7 ayes.
Motion passes. Thank you. So that completes our agenda for actions. I would call on any board members if they have any closing remarks that they would like to make. Dr. Morrison.
I'll just say very briefly, you did an excellent job standing in a very tough spot. As you know, Lillian has a tough job, and you did it with grace, and we're all grateful for your willingness to step in when she's gone.
Thanks. I'll be glad when she comes back.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I would second that, and I would also second your previous comments regarding Dr. Owen. Appreciate you so much.
On that matter, I don't want to stay silent, but I don't trust myself to speak.
With that said, go ahead. Go ahead.
Clarification on the meeting dates, whether there'll be workshop on both of those or none of them.
What dates?
22nd of July and October the 28th. And you can let us know just so we.
Those are both regularly, like our quarterly meetings, so there will be workshop and meeting like we've had.
So it's the day before and that.
Yes, the Thursday and Friday. And we can clarify that and make sure calendar invites reflect it. But we'll have a few special called meetings coming up that will just be, the shorter events, but those in July and October are our quarterly meetings. Yes, that October meeting, Nathan's saying, will be at Roan State. So we'll again make sure that reflects in the calendar invites, but we're excited to be traveling there for that meeting.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? That being said, the meeting is adjourned.
So be it.
10 minutes late.
Okay. Now, my driver will be here in a few minutes, so